Was I expelled from Hogwarts? Hello again, dear adventurers of the multiverse. Thanks for joining us once more on this epic journey. Remember, this story is pure science fiction from our wild imagination. So don't go trying to summon dragons in your backyard. The rights of this amazing novel belong entirely to its original author. We are only the narrators. Do you want more adventures? Show some love to our YouTube channel with a subscription and a like. And if you want exclusive content, our Patreon is waiting for you with open arms. Chapter 651 Christmas Ball. Ralph and Gabrielle had danced 2 dances, plus the 3 with Sherry, and he hadn't had a break, so he was getting tired. The boy wanted to leave the dance floor and rest, but found a group of witches had gathered where he'd been sitting. They were excitedly waiting there, like a pile of brightly colored candies waiting for customers. Sherry was resting nearby, and she subtly gestured to Ralph, reminding him, these people were waiting for him. Ralph felt a headache coming on, and just then Marjorie walked in with Hermione, dancing as she asked, aren't you two going to dance? Ralph hummed in agreement, tilting his head, but there are so many witches over there, I'll wait until they leave before going back, then let's switch partners, Marjorie suggested. Ralph thought Marjorie wanted to dance with him, but unexpectedly, Hermione suddenly spoke up, Ralph, I'd like to invite you to dance, is that alright? Ralph looked at the girl's slightly flushed cheeks and nodded gently. Of course. Marjorie took Hermione's arm, spun her around, and then pushed her into Ralph's arms. Hermione almost tripped, but luckily caught Ralph in time to avoid falling. Marjorie pulled away the reluctant Gabrielle, then patted Ralph's bottom in a lewd manner, winking and saying, Ralph, I'm entrusting my dance partner to you. Tonight is Hermione's first time, she's inexperienced, so you have to guide her slowly. Be patient and gentle, and enjoy it. For some reason, Ralph felt something was off about Marjorie's words. Are you sure you're talking about dancing? A group of female students in line were dumbfounded when they saw Ralph and Marjorie exchanging dance partners on the dance floor. Not far away, Crumb's face also darkened. He had been waiting for Granger to finish dancing so he could invite her again. Damn it. At this moment, Ralph was oblivious to the stares, or rather, he had no energy to care. He was completely absorbed in dancing with Hermione. But even with his mind focused and every part of his body tense, he almost surrendered to Hermione's relentless offensive. This is no exaggeration. Before he had even played a quarter of the Lover's Waltz, Hermione had already stepped on him 7 or 8 times. This was only because Ralph had been alerted by his spider sense and managed to dodge several times, otherwise, he would have been in even worse shape. Ralph finally understood that Marjorie's warning wasn't a joke. Hermione was indeed a novice when it came to dancing. And even an experienced dancer like Ralph couldn't handle a novice like her. Hermione, still blushing, desperately tried to defend herself. Ralph, I really can dance. I learned from my mother, I'm not lying to you, Hermione, I really want to believe you. Ralph sighed, but how can I believe you with this kind of performance? You stepped on my foot again. Hermione quickly withdrew her foot, apologizing. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to. Ralph sighed again. He'd rather face the line of witches than be subjected to Hermione's ultimate torment. But Hermione wasn't ready to give up. She gently tugged at Ralph's sleeve, pleading, give me another chance, please. If I step on your foot again, I'll give you a galleon. If I don't step on you for 5 consecutive dance steps, you give me a galleon, okay? Ralph laughed. With Hermione offering him money like this, how could he refuse? Come on, Ralph said impatiently. Let's make the most of this wonderful ball time. Hermione confidently started dancing again, but after only a couple of steps, she stepped on Ralph's foot. The boy looked at Hermione, who pursed her lips and said, 1 gallon. Ralph suppressed a laugh, then hugged Hermione and swayed her, deliberately making some difficult moves. Sure enough, she became flustered and quickly said again, 2 gallons. Not long after, she hummed, 3 gallons 4 gallons, Hermione then kicked a dozen more times in a row, her momentum growing weaker and weaker, her voice getting lower and lower, until finally it was so faint that even she probably couldn't hear it. Ralph glanced down at his shoes, which had turned gray. Fortunately, his magic could make his skin as tough as dragon scales, otherwise his feet would probably be like pig's trotters tonight. Hermione's eyes were a little red. She had indeed practiced dancing in private, but for some reason, she became extremely nervous when actually dancing with Ralph. Her legs and feet wouldn't obey her commands, as if she had Down syndrome. Ralph, maybe You should find another partner, Hermione finally said. Ralph looked at the disappointed Hermione. He didn't agree, but said softly, "You're just too nervous. Just follow my rhythm, and I'm sure I can train you." Ralph's arm slowly moved down from the girl's shoulders. "Don't be so tense, like a piece of wood. Relax your shoulders, lower your waist, lift your hips, and spread your feet apart." Looking at Ralph's earnest instruction, a sense of trust inexplicably rose deep within Hermione's heart. She composed herself and began to spin slowly with the boy on the dance floor. Their pace was slow. Ralph held Hermione's body with his hands, guiding her slowly. When Hermione stepped on Ralph's foot again, she looked at him apologetically, and the boy always gave her an exceptionally gentle smile, comforting her. "It's okay, try again." Hermione nodded emphatically and began to dance along with Ralph's steps again, each step taken with extra care, afraid of accidentally stepping on his foot again. The two danced like this, and after 2 songs, Hermione was finally able to keep up with Ralph's steps and no longer step on his feet. Hermione danced better and better, her skirt fluttering with her steps on the dance floor. The music slowly reached its climax, and the recurring sounds of piano and cello began to rise. Ralph released Hermione's body, letting her begin to spin on her own. 1 circle, 2 circles, 3 circles. Hermione's sky blue skirt bloomed like a flower in the center of the dance floor, the transparent veil billowing. When the music ended, Hermione stopped, panting, and said excitedly, "I think I've learned it." "Yes," Ralph nodded with a sense of accomplishment. But Hermione's next words made the boy's expression freeze. "Ralph, I just counted, I missed stepping on your feet for 300 paces. You owe me 60 galleons." Hermione laughed, then suddenly stood on tiptoe, leaned forward, and bumped her forehead hard against Ralph's head, her face flushed, saying, "Ralph, thank you for dancing with me." Chapter 652 Christmas Ball. Hermione quickly turned and ran away, leaving a bewildered Ralph rubbing his sore forehead. Dancing is dancing. Why hit someone? Ralph regretted not immediately falling to the ground to feign injury. He was too slow. Just as the boy was about to leave the dance floor, Margaret gracefully glided to his side. She lightly hooked her finger around his belt and winked seductively, saying, "Sir, would you like some special services?" Ralph chuckled helplessly. "You two are really good at this, aren't you? You won't stop until you've drained me dry, will you?" Margaret smiled smugly, wrapping her arm around Ralph's waist and saying sweetly, "Tired from dancing?" "A little." Margaret leaned closer, her alluring, fox-like face near the boy's, her breath sweet as orchids, and said in a teasing tone, "Shirley, Gabrielle, Hermione, just 3 girls, and you're already feeling the strain. Your legs are starting to go weak? Little Ralph, your body's a bit weak right now, you need to exercise more." Ralph rolled his eyes. What did she mean by just 3 girls? He danced 8 dances without rest. Some of those dances were with Hermione, a complete novice who knew nothing about dance. You know, the more inexperienced someone is, the more energy and stamina they expend. But since it was Margaret, Ralph had to straighten up no matter what. He started dancing to the music, then suddenly remembered something and asked, "Margaret, did you say bad things about me to Gabrielle?" "No." "Right." Margaret feigned out. "I only said good things." "Then who said I like long legs and high heels?" Ralph glared at her. "That's not a bad thing," Margaret said with a charming smile. "It's just revealing a little personal quirk of yours." "Who has that kind of quirk, and touching your legs?" Ralph gritted his teeth. "When have I ever done anything like that?" "You've already forgotten what you did," Margaret said with a resentful expression. "Last summer at the Thunderbird Sanctuary in Arizona, you sneaked into my room in the middle of the night and touched my legs for half an hour. Wasn't that because you got bitten by a rattlesnake, and I was applying ointment?" Ralph retorted irritably. "And it was only for 5 minutes, not half an hour." "Never mind how many minutes, I'm just asking if you touched me or not," Margaret asked matter-of-factly. At the dining table, Harry stared intently at Jo and Cedric like a lovesick fool. Harry watched them all night, watching them dance, rest, and then leave the Great Hall hands in hand, chatting and laughing. Leaving the Great Hall at this hour, they certainly wouldn't go back to their respective lounges. They must be doing something else. The thought of this made Harry feel incredibly irritated, wishing he could curse Cedric into a pile of jelly. So, he chased after him, intending to stop Cedric. Unfortunately, Harry was a bit too slow. By the time he left the Great Hall, Cedric and Jo had already disappeared. Harry stared blankly at the empty hallway, unsure of what to do. Should he go back to his dormitory and sleep? Harry was about to head towards the Gryffindor common room when he suddenly remembered his good friend Ron, still suffering at Snape's. Although Professor McGonagall had warned him not to go to the potions office that night, Harry disregarded his warning and decided to rescue Ron. He first went back to the Gryffindor common room to retrieve the invisibility cloak, then quickly headed to the dungeons. As he neared the potions office, Harry suddenly heard an unpleasant, familiar voice echoing down the corridor. I don't understand why you're making such a fuss, Igor, Severus, you can't pretend this didn't happen. Karkaroff's voice sounded frightened and hoarse, as if afraid of being overheard. For months, that thing on my arm has become more and more obvious. I'm very worried now. He's coming back, then run away, Snape said calmly. Igor, you run away, I'm staying at Hogwarts, even if he really does come back. Through the invisibility cloak, Harry saw Karkaroff somewhat panicked, nervously reaching up to touch his goatee, then twirling it around his fingers. Harry didn't know what they were talking about. He wanted to get closer, but was afraid of being discovered. In the end, he decided to hurry and rescue Ron while Snape was out of the office. Harry quickly arrived at the potions office. The door wasn't locked. He easily turned the doorknob and went inside. Ron was bound hand and foot to a cauldron, his mouth stuffed with a rag. Harry ripped off the invisibility cloak, then tore off the tattered cloth, and whispered, "Ron, I'm coming to save you." Ron looked at Harry, his face full of anxiety, and cried out, "Run, Harry. Snape has put magic on the door, he can sense whoever comes in." Harry felt as if he had fallen into an ice cave. He turned and ran towards the door, but a figure was already blocking the entrance. Snape walked in, locked the door from the inside, and strode towards them, his long black robes billowing behind him. "Potter, I knew you would come to save Weasley. Your stupidity is always so obvious," Snape sneered. "Professor Snape," Harry stammered, "Ron didn't invite you to the ball. There must be some misunderstanding." "I'll investigate that," Snape said fiercely. "But you broke into my office and tried to take Weasley away. I'm going to punish you." "What punishment?" Harry asked, his body trembling with coldness. "Deductions or solitary confinement," but Snape smiled wickedly. "No, Potter, there's a much better punishment." Suddenly, a black object appeared in his hand. Harry looked closely and realized it was black underwear. Harry didn't know if the underwear was originally black, or if it hadn't been washed in a long time, but it reeked of a foul odor. "I'll hang you up and shove this thing into your mouth," Snape's eyes gleamed with malice. "To be honest, I always wanted to shove it into your father's mouth, but I never got the chance." "Oh, right, Potter, I forgot to tell you." Snape stared intently into Harry's eyes and whispered, "Merry Christmas." Chapter 653 Ralph, Sherry, don't disturb dragon sleep. Although the Christmas ball wasn't over yet, Ralph and Sherry had no intention of returning after leaving the Great Hall. He had had a great time that night, but was also quite tired, and it was time to rest and enjoy Christmas Eve. However, while strolling through Hogwarts Castle, Ralph and Sherry kept getting harassed by students, so they decided to return to their black trunks. At that moment, thanks to a weather charm, snow began to fall inside the trunks, turning the whole world into a blanket of white. Facing the swirling snowflakes, the boy and girl strolled leisurely along the frozen lake, wandering aimlessly and freely. Shirley walked lightly on the snow, each step making a crunching sound. She twirled slightly, her voice lively and playful. "It's best inside the box, just the two of us. We can do whatever we want, no one will see us, and no one will bother us." Ralph watched the girl's skirt sway like a blooming flower and asked with a smile, "So, what do you want to do most right now?" "I want to." Shirley hesitated for a moment, then looked up at Ralph's face, a slight smile playing on her lips. "I won't tell you." "Tell me." "No, really not." "Yes, fine, you forced me to." Ralph breathed warm air on his fingers, then reached down to Shirley's ribs. The girl's body was extremely sensitive. The moment his hands touched her, she immediately curled up, giggling involuntarily. It itches so much." "No, love, don't touch there." "Wah, please spare me, I'll tell you." Love finally let go. Sherry, her face flushed, panted as she straightened her skirt. She glanced at the boy, then suddenly bent down, grabbed a handful of snow from the ground, and stuffed it into his collar. Sherry, facing Love, put her hands behind her back and backed away, grinning. "Catch me, and I'll tell you." Love grinned, pulling snow from his clothes, and laughed. "Sherry, once I catch you, It won't just be telling me I'll let you off. Sherry made a playful face at him, then turned around, lifted her skirt, and ran forward with small, quick steps. Love waited until Sherry had run about 10 meters before chasing after her. Although he wasn't fast, he quickly caught up with the slower Sherry. Hearing the approaching footsteps behind her, Sherry bent down again, grabbed a handful of snow, made a snowball, and threw it at Love, but he easily dodged it. The girl wanted to make another snowball, but the snow was slippery, and she stumbled and fell in the snow. Rolf quickly ran over, squatted beside her, and asked if she was hurt. When Shirley honestly answered no, the boy, who had just caught his breath, immediately made a snowball and threw it at her head. Rolf laughed heartily. Shirley puffed out her cheeks, not to be outdone, and jumped into his arms. Rolf was tackled to the ground, and he hugged Shirley. The two of them tangled together, rolling around in the thick snow. Finally, Shirley rolled on top, sitting on Rolf's waist, pinning the snow-covered boy beneath her, a triumphant smile on her face. Rolf, his groin firmly pressed down, gasped. Shirley noticed his expression and asked nervously, "Rolf, did I hurt you?" Rolf nodded slightly, and she quickly shifted her body down. But it was fine if she didn't move. As soon as Shirley moved down, Rolf clearly felt the girl's too firm, unripe peach-like buttocks slowly sliding down his waist. The stimulation made his whole body restless. The naive Shirley didn't know what kind of evil had just been awakened beneath her soft buttocks. She asked softly with a worried look on her face, "Rolf, where do you feel uncomfortable? Let me rub it for you." "No, don't rub it. The more you rub it, the more uncomfortable I feel," Rolf hissed, quickly stopping the girl's bold behavior. He could control the gun just by pressing it down, but if he tried to control it with his bare hands, he was afraid it would go off accidentally. It seems he needs to find some time to properly teach Shirley about the Hogwarts motto. Don't disturb a dragon's rest. Seeing Rolf's flushed face, Shirley assumed he was in pain and continued, "What should we do?" Rolf suppressed his agitation, thought for a moment, and said, "You can massage my legs. I danced a lot tonight, and they're a little sore." Hearing this request, Shirley tilted her head, looking puzzled, and asked, "Sore? We only danced 3 dances, and my legs aren't sore at all. Why are yours sore?" Rolf looked at the girl who knew the answer already and smiled. "I also danced for a little while with Gabrielle, Hermione, and Marjorie." "A little while." Shirley rolled her eyes at Rolf and said, "Then let the 3 of them massage your legs. How about that?" Okay, Rolf said with a smile. "The 4 of you can massage them together, taking turns, so it won't be tiring?" "Pa, you wish," the girl snorted. "I've already locked the trunk. They won't be able to come in to see you tonight." Rolf was both amused and exasperated. Seeing snowflakes covering Sherry's delicate shoulders, he smiled and gently brushed them away, saying, "Next time we dance, I promise I won't listen to them. I'll dance with you until your legs are sore, and then I'll massage them for you." "Okay, you said it." Sherry glared at Rolf, gently massaging his legs. Rolf lay in the snowdrift, his head resting on his arm, enjoying Sherry's massage while gazing at the sky. Like the ceiling of the Great Hall at Hogwarts, the top of the box also possessed magic, displaying the starry sky. At this moment, the moon was high in the sky, Mars was still dazzling, and nearby were the constellations Sirius and Sagittarius. The pine branches were bent low by the weight of snow, and the shy Andromeda constellation was half hidden. Rolf stared at the brilliant, low-hanging starry sky, lost in thought for a moment. "Ralph," Shirley whispered, so softly that Ralph thought he was dreaming. "Ralph, what are you thinking about?" "I'm thinking." Ralph reached out and pinched Shirley's rosy cheeks, touching her nose with his fingers, and said softly, "I wish we could always be like this." Shirley looked down at Ralph's face and smiled. "Of course I would. I'm going to be your assistant for life." Ralph laughed, stroking her soft, flowing red hair, and asked gently, "By the way, I've caught you. Now tell me, what do you want to do most right now?" Shirley, her cheeks like peach blossoms and her eyes sparkling, gazed down at the face so close to hers. She stroked Ralph's cheek, then leaned down and kissed him on the lips. The girl's kiss was passionate and intense, and after a long while, the two reluctantly parted. Shirley sat on Ralph's lap, gently pursing her burning lips. In the moonlight reflecting off the snow, her face was incredibly alluring. The girl leaned down again, extending her warm tongue to lick Rav's lips, and said coquettishly, "Rav, this is what I want to do most right now." If you are listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, It means it was downloaded and re-uploaded without effort. We warmly invite you to visit our channel, Fanfic World. There you will find the original version of this story and many other novels of various genres. We look forward to seeing you dive into a world of incredible novels. Chapter 654 Sherry's Secret. Rolf and Shirley strolled along the lake for a long time before returning to the cabin. Perhaps because they hadn't eaten enough at the dinner and the dance had taken its toll, they were both quite hungry. So, the fish they had caught during the day came in handy. They set up a grill at the cabin door and grilled the fish over the campfire. Rolf even splurged on a bottle of Hufflepuff's wine. Though not a connoisseur, he wanted to taste what wine preserved for 1,000 years tasted like. This wasn't just wine, it was the sedimentation of time and history. Sitting by the campfire, Rolf looked at the girl beside him, shook the bottle, and asked, "Shirley, would you like some?" Shirley, holding a lemon and squeezing juice onto the fish, looked up and softly replied, "Sure." Rolf then picked up a glass and poured some wine into it, but not much. 2 Christmases ago, he, Sherry, Hermione, and Dumbledore had a get-together at the Hog's Head in Aberforth. Sherry got drunk after just a few glasses of mead. Since then, she'd almost never touched alcohol, and when she did, it was always something as low alcohol as butterbeer to ensure she wouldn't get drunk. So, Rolf hadn't poured Sherry, who had a low alcohol tolerance, too much, but tonight the girl volunteered, "Pour more." Rolf chuckled, "This liquor isn't low in alcohol, it's easy to get drunk, it's alright." Sherry blinked, smiling sweetly, "I'll just sleep when I'm drunk, and you can carry me back to my room." Rolf laughed too. Sherry certainly wasn't like Hermione, who would cause a scene when drunk. He lifted the bottle, finally filling her glass this time. They clinked glasses lightly, and then Sherry smiled, her bright eyes crinkling into crescents, as she held the glass in both hands and took a small sip of the amber liquid, more precious than gold. The girl instantly felt the wine like a cool fire, flowing down her throat and warming her stomach. Her cheeks flushed crimson. Shirley savored the taste on her tongue. It was a very special sensation, as if she were tasting nuts, oak, fruit, and the flavors of summer. She took another sip and couldn't help but exclaim, "It's delicious, it really is delicious." Rolf also savored the taste. Compared to this wine, all the wines he had drunk before tasted like coarse horse piss. Rolf felt inexplicably melancholy. The good news was that this wine was truly delicious, the bad news was that it was a non-renewable resource, and every bottle consumed was one less available. And he only had a mere 1,000 bottles left. He felt so sad. Sherry's cheeks flushed even more. She took another small sip and asked curiously, "Rolf, does this wine have a name?" Rolf's lips curled up. Sherry, hearing the boy call her name, Sherry tilted her head, looking puzzled. "What's wrong?" Rolf couldn't help but chuckle, reaching out to tap her nose with his fingertip. He said gently, "I was talking about the wine's name." "It's the same as you, Sherry." The girl's eyes widened suddenly, staring blankly at the wine in her hand. This wine, with a 1,000-year history, shared the same name as her, and she had even drunk it. In that instant, Sherry felt incredibly wondrous. She took another sip of Sherry and suddenly asked, "Rolf, you said we drank Professor Hufflepuff's treasured wine. Will she come after us?" "Professor Hufflepuff has been dead for 1,000 years, Rolf chuckled. "Unless she comes back from the dead, how could she bother us?" "But don't forget," Sherry blinked, "Hermione's time turner is in Professor Hufflepuff's possession. You can come back from 1,000 years ago, so she can use the time turner to come to the Sierra too." Rolf paused, then said, "That makes sense." He had previously wondered why a Hufflepuff hoarded so much wine but didn't drink it herself. It was like saving a lot of money and burying it before dying, utterly foolish. But if she planned to use the time turner to come to the future and drink the wine, then it would make sense. Thinking this, Rolf's expression suddenly changed. "Oh no, what's wrong?" Sherry asked hastily. "I borrowed Professor Hufflepuff's money when I went to the Kingdom of Nagia to buy goblin jewelry," Rolf said. "I gave her a high interest rate and even wrote an IOU to get her to lend me the money." Rolf was speechless. He thought that since he was going back to the future anyway, even if he wrote an IOU, Hufflepuff wouldn't get the money. He never expected that she would leave behind a time turner. With 1,000 years of compound interest, Rolf now couldn't even calculate how much he owed Hufflepuff. When she came and found that he had been hiding his wine for 1,000 years, he didn't even want to think about it. "What should we do?" Sherry asked. Rolf took a big gulp of wine to calm himself down. He thought for a moment and said, "It's okay. When Hufflepuff really comes, we'll make her prove that she is Hufflepuff. I'll say I'm Merlin, pay up." Who would believe that? At this moment, the fish on the campfire had turned a slightly brownish color, and the tender white flesh exposed to the air emitted an enticing aroma. Ralph cut the grilled fish in half, handing half to Sherry. As they ate, they continued their conversation about how to be a deadbeat and avoid paying Hufflepuff. The girl, taking a small bite of fish, suddenly asked, "Ralph, can you tell me about Ravenclaw? Why are you suddenly interested in her?" Ralph asked. Sherry said softly, "Do you remember the letter Ravenclaw left you?" Ralph nodded. Ravenclaw had left him a letter in her secret room, a letter spanning 1,000 years, containing many things. At the end of that letter, it said, "Take care of Helena and the girl who can enter my grave." Sherry looked up at Ralph and said softly, "I can enter her grave? Isn't that talking about me?" "What are you thinking?" Ralph asked. "The orphanage I live in is near the Ravenclaw cemetery. I can even enter her grave." Sherry paused for a moment, then said, "Could I be a Ravenclaw descendant, able to enter the cemetery because of her blood?" "Impossible." Ralph shook his head firmly. Rowena Ravenclaw only had one daughter, Helena. After Helena died, the Ravenclaw bloodline was completely extinguished. "You couldn't be her descendant, is that so?" Sherry was somewhat confused. She whispered, "Ralph, I actually have a secret I've always wanted to tell you." "A secret?" Ralph was taken aback. "I can change my appearance?" "I know," Ralph said. "Didn't you master shape-shifting a long time ago?" "No." Sherry shook her head. Her long red hair suddenly turned golden. She looked at the boy and said seriously, "Actually, I am a shape-shifter." Chapter 655 The Gryffindor Bloodline? As Sherry's red hair turned blonde, her appearance instantly transformed into Margaery's. Ralph stared blankly at the familiar face. He had grown up with Margaery since childhood. He knew every single detail about her, down to the smallest mole. But now, Sherry's face was exactly the same as Margaery's. He couldn't tell the difference at all. Of course, their auras were different. Margaery was alluring, while this Margaery was incredibly dignified. It was like the same person, two completely different sides. This bizarre contrast amused Ralph. The boy suddenly remembered that in his first transfiguration class, Professor McGonagall had praised Sherry's transfiguration talent, even saying she was no less than Tonks. Tonks, after all, was a transfiguration magus, the kind of talent Merlin bestowed upon him. Ralph had wondered then how powerful someone could be to rival Tonks's talent, but he never imagined Sherry was also a transfiguration magus. The girl changed her appearance again, transforming into Hermione, Fleur, Gabrielle, and even Helena, each face remarkably lifelike. Ralph couldn't help but marvel. This was the metamorphosis magus. Without Polyjuice Potion or transfiguration, she could easily become someone else, and not just similar in appearance, but exactly the same. One person equals all. Such magic was truly enviable. Ralph suddenly remembered something. He pondered for a moment, then slowly said, "Shirley, do you remember? I told you before that metamorphosis magus, Parseltongue, and the Eye of the Gods, these spells are all inherited through bloodlines. Ordinary wizards cannot learn them later in life." Shirley nodded. She understood what Ralph meant. These special spells were inherited, so they generally appeared stably in specific pure-blood families. Just like Parseltongue, it was the mark of Slytherin, and wizards with this talent were usually descendants of Salazar Slytherin, like the Gaunt family. But I've checked the records, and none of the existing pure-blood families are metamorphosis magus, Shirley said. Even Twink's parents aren't metamorphosis magus. Tonk's mother is Andromeda Black, a daughter of the Black family and Sirius's cousin, Ralph explained. The Blacks have intermarried with almost every pure-blood family, including those with metamorphosis magus. So, it's possible for metamorphosis magus to suddenly awaken in a generation, and Twinks should fall into that category, Sherry asked. Then, which family with metamorphosis magus did the Black family intermarry with? That family disappeared long ago, so you definitely won't find it when you search for current pure-blood families, Ralph said calmly. But when I went back 1,000 years, I heard Professor Hufflepuff say that that family was. The boy paused, then continued, Gryffindor, Gryffindor. Sherry looked astonished. She hadn't considered this answer at all. The families of the four great masters all possess special magic, Ralph said softly. The Hufflepuff's ability to hear all things and communicate with plants, the Slytherin's Parseltongue, the Ravenclaw's natural legitimacy, And the Gryffindors. Disguise magus. Sherry paused, then said, "So, you mean I'm a descendant of Gryffindor?" "I do think so," Ralph said, staring into Sherry's ruby-like eyes. "Actually, your eyes and hair are very similar to Godric Gryffindor's. I had that feeling the first time I saw him, in fact, even though they were both disguise magus." Ralph didn't think there was any connection between them, but those eyes and hair were just too similar. Just like Harry, whose eyes were so similar to Lily's that it was hard for others not to connect the two. "Is that so?" Sherry slowly processed the information. After a moment, she asked, "Do you know where Gryffindor's descendants are now?" "I don't know," Ralph shook his head. After Ravenclaw died, Gryffindor didn't attend her funeral. They left Hogwarts to follow Slytherin. At that time, Gryffindor had no children, so nobody knows where their descendants are. Hearing the boy say this, Sherry seemed a little disappointed. As an orphan, she really wanted to know who her parents were and why they had abandoned her at the convent. But the clues seemed to have gone cold. Ralph reached out and ruffled the girl's hair, comforting her. "Godric Valley, and the ruins of the Gryffindor family. That two-tailed mermaid in the bathroom, if I'm not mistaken, it was also left behind by the Gryffindors. Don't be discouraged, we'll definitely find other clues," Shirley softly hummed in agreement, tilting her head back and nuzzling her nose against the boy's warm palm, saying gently, "Ralph, thank you. I really don't know what I would have done without you." Ralph smiled brightly. "Why are you being so polite? Hurry up and eat the fish, it'll get cold soon." The girl nodded vigorously. The two continued eating the grilled fish, quickly finishing it off. Then they sat by the campfire, enjoying the snowy night. All around was silent. In this silence, the silent moonlight, the flickering flames, and the shadows of the boy and girl, like a layer of light ink, overlapped and intertwined on the walls, indistinct and shimmering. Ralph gazed at the vast night, still thinking about Gryffindor and his descendants. The boy suddenly remembered that Gryffindor had said he wanted to drink the spring water on Avalon Island, like Ravenclaw had given birth to Helena, and have a child sent from heaven. Surely Gryffindor wouldn't have offspring that way? As the boy pondered this, he caught sight of Sherry nestled in his arms, still holding a wineglass, sipping slowly. He said softly, "Sherry, you'll really get drunk soon." I'm not drunk." Sherry turned around, a blush creeping up her fair neck. She tilted her head back, leaned closer to Ralph, and looked directly at him, her eyes alluring. "Ralph, I'm really not drunk." Ralph stared blankly at the tipsy girl, his heart racing. She was so beautiful. In an instant, all he wanted was to hold Sherry in his arms. The thought had barely formed in his mind when Ralph was tightly embraced by Sherry. She pressed herself against the boy, as if trying to meld herself into his body. Their lips met. He touched the delicate touch, a scent of nuts, oak, fruit, and the height of summer. It was the taste of Sherry. After a breathtaking kiss, Ralph released Sherry and found her, drunk, curled up asleep in his arms like a kitten. Ralph gently stroked Sherry's beautiful face, and after a moment, picked her up and carried her to his room. "This has been blocked 9 times in a row. 9 times. I posted this chapter at 4 a.m. I can't believe it can still be blocked after being deleted like this." Speechless. Chapter 656 The Perverted Snape. At dawn, Shirley opened her eyes with a splitting headache. She covered her head with her hand, staring blankly at the ceiling, trying to figure out where she was. Fortunately, the surroundings were familiar. She immediately recognized it as Rove's room, and she was lying in his bed. The girl breathed a soft sigh of relief. She turned her head, but Rove wasn't there. She reached out and touched the blankets beside her. They were slightly cool. It seemed he had been up for a while. Shirley sat up, rubbing her aching head, and began trying to recall what had happened the night before. After leaving the ball, she and Rove returned to the trunk together, then went for a walk, grilled fish, drank, and chatted. Shirley realized her memory stopped at the point where she initiated the kiss with Rove. She couldn't remember anything after that. Had she fallen asleep while kissing Rove? Sherry slapped her forehead, annoyed. "Drinking makes things worse." Just then, the bedroom door opened, and Rove walked in carrying a glass. Seeing the girl tapping her head, he asked with concern, "Does your head hurt a lot?" Sherry looked up and said softly, "It does hurt a little." Rove sat on the edge of the bed, handed her a glass of potion, and smiled. "That's how it is when you're drunk. You feel even worse after you sober up. Drink this potion quickly, and your headache will be gone." Sherry smiled sweetly at the considerate boy, took the glass, and drank the potion in one gulp. Her headache immediately subsided, and she felt much more awake. "Get up quickly," Rove said, walking to the window and drawing back the curtains. "We're going to be very busy today." Sherry nodded. She knew they were going to Godric's Valley today, so she quickly got up and went to the bathroom to wash up. After washing up, Shirley sat in front of the vanity mirror. Ralph took a comb and helped her slick her burgundy hair back, tying it into a pretty ponytail. Looking at the ponytail-wearing girl in the mirror, Ralph's lips curled into a slight smile. He definitely preferred Shirley this way. The two quickly left the trunk and parted ways at an intersection. Shirley went to the Gryffindor common room to find Hermione. Ralph went to the kitchen, packed breakfast for the three of them, and then went to the foyer to wait for them. Because the ball last night lasted until midnight, everyone had gotten up late, and there were only a few students scattered around. But Ralph suddenly saw Harry and Ron emerging from a corridor. They were walking suspiciously, looking very suspicious. He called out from a distance, and hearing the sudden sound, they turned around quickly like startled birds. Seeing it was Ralph, they breathed a sigh of relief. Ron raised an eyebrow and asked, "What's wrong with you two? You look really scared. Is someone chasing you?" No, Harry chuckled. "How could anyone be chasing us? Then why did you come out of that corridor so early in the morning?" Ron asked. "It leads to the underground classrooms, the dungeons, and the Slytherin common room, but not the Gryffindor common room." He paused, guessing. "You two didn't go and cause trouble in the Slytherin common room, did you?" "No," Harry quickly denied, but seeing he couldn't hide it any longer, he had to confess, "Actually, we just escaped from Snape's office. We were afraid he'd come after us, so we were being very cautious." "Snape's office?" Ron asked in surprise. "You two went to steal his medicine." "No," Harry said sadly, "we were caught by Snape and locked up overnight. We only escaped this morning." Ron thought for a moment, still curious. "Why did Snape catch you two?" "It was all George and Fred's doing," Ron said through gritted teeth. He quickly recounted the whole story, and Harry, still shaken, added, "I know Ron was captured, so I went to rescue him, and then I got caught by Snape too." Suddenly remembering something, he quickly pulled a bottle from his pocket and asked, "Ralph, do you know what kind of potion this is? Snape poured this into my mouth last night and even put a few drops in my eyes. I took it this morning when I escaped, intending to show it to Madame Pomfrey. Do you think I might have been blinded by it?" Ralph took the bottle, opened it, examined the liquid, and sniffed it. "This is Clarity Potion, made from black beetle eyeballs, eel eyeballs, and blueberry lutein. It helps nourish the eyes, relieve eye fatigue, and prevent nearsightedness. It's non-toxic and harmless." Harry, still incessantly cursing Snape, was stunned by Ralph's words. "Non-toxic? Not only is it non-toxic, it's also good for your eyes," Ralph said. "You can drink it more often. It can prevent your nearsightedness from worsening." Harry was momentarily speechless. "So, Snape was actually quite nice." "No, that's not right," Harry quickly denied. "He must have given me the medicine because he was afraid Professor Dumbledore would find out after he tortured me." "How did he torture you?" Ralph asked with interest. Harry naturally didn't mention the black underwear. That was too disgusting. He said bitterly, "Snape put a mask on me last night, only allowing me to show my eyes. I wasn't allowed to close them. I had to look at him." "Ralph, do you think Snape is a pervert?" Ralph couldn't help but think to himself that Snape was indeed a bit of a pervert, but he had already shown restraint by not making Harry wear women's clothing. "By the way, Ron asked, did you see George and Fred in the Great Hall this morning?" "No," Ron shook his head. "You want revenge?" "Yes," Ron said. "They tricked me with fake dance partners, which led to me being caught by Snape. I'm going to make them pay." "George and Fred really went too far," Harry chimed in. "They've always been like that," Ron said angrily. "When I was 3, Fred turned my teddy bear into a hideous giant spider because I broke his toy broom. I was hugging the teddy bear when it suddenly sprouted many legs and pounced on me. I'm still afraid of spiders now. When I was 5, Fred and George wanted me to make an unbreakable vow. I even shook hands with Fred, and the vow almost came true, but luckily Dad found out. When I was 7, they tricked me into stealing Mom's wand. I took the wand and went on a magical rampage, setting the house on fire." Listening to Ron recount the twins' crimes, Ron couldn't help but sigh. It's truly remarkable that he's still alive. Chapter 657 Harry's Nightmare. Standing in the foyer, Ron and Harry listened to Ron's indignant accusations against the twins, and they both felt sympathy for him. However, when they heard Ron's plan to retaliate against the twins and make them pay, Ron and Harry exchanged a glance and remained silent. It wasn't that they didn't support him, but Ron clearly lacked the ability and intelligence. His attempt to retaliate against the twins would likely only result in self-humiliation. Seeing that no one was around, Harry suddenly said, "Ron, yesterday when I went to the potions office, I saw Headmaster Karkaroff and Snape. They were talking furtively in the corridor." Ron said, "Oh," and asked, "You overheard their conversation?" Harry shook his head. "I was in a hurry to save Ron, and I only vaguely heard Karkaroff say something like, 'It was getting clearer.' Snape told him to run away." Ron narrowed his eyes. Karkaroff was probably saying that the dark mark was becoming more and more obvious. Every Death Eater had a dark mark on their arm. It was both Voldemort's mark and his way of summoning servants. After Voldemort's death, the dark mark lay dormant for over a decade, but with his power rekindling, it has become active again. Karkaroff, seeing this, was naturally afraid. After all, he was a traitor who had betrayed many of his own people. "They're probably plotting something," Harry guessed. But Karkaroff was afraid of being exposed, so Snape let him escape. "Maybe it's related to the Triwizard Tournament," Ron added, fully utilizing his imagination. "Durmstrang has never won, so he definitely wants to win this time. He probably went to Snape to find out about the second challenge." Speaking of the Triwizard Tournament, Ron's eyes darted around, and he casually asked, "Ron, did you unlock the secret of the golden egg?" Ron shook his head. No. Harry and Ron were both disappointed. They had been hoping to get information from Ron. Ralph hadn't yet unraveled the secret of the golden egg, but that wasn't his focus at the moment. He looked at Harry and asked, "Has your scar been hurting lately?" As a half-finished Horcrux, a piece of Voldemort's soul resided in the scar on Harry's forehead. Whenever Voldemort was emotionally agitated, Harry's scar would ache, and his consciousness would be forced to enter Voldemort's body through his soul, spying on his actions. Often, Harry's dreams could be considered important intelligence to deduce Voldemort's movements. It hurt. Harry hesitated for a moment, then said, "I dreamed about Voldemort before Christmas, and that night the scar hurt terribly." Ralph's spirits lifted, and he pressed. What was he doing? Voldemort seemed to be with a woman. Harry tried to recall. They were talking, but I can't remember what they said. I only saw tombstones all around. Tombstones? Ralph's expression turned serious. Could it be that Voldemort, as he suspected, had really gone to the graveyard in Godric's Hollow to find Lily's remains? Just then, footsteps sounded in the distance. All three turned to look and saw Sherry and Hermione walking straight towards them. Harry knew they were looking for Ron. He thought for a moment and asked curiously, "Ron, are you three going to the library to study so early in the morning?" "No," Ron said, "we're going to Hogsmeade." "I'm leaving now, we'll talk later." Harry nodded, while Ron, standing beside them, stared longingly at Sherry and Hermione. He also wanted to find an excuse to go to Hogsmeade with them. But Ron didn't dare say it, and could only watch enviously as Ron led Sherry and Hermione out of the hall. The three left the castle, boarded a Thestral carriage, and headed straight for Hogsmeade. The carriage finally stopped in front of the Hogshead pub. Ron got out and saw an old man standing at the pub's entrance. "Hey, Aberforth." Ralph walked over and asked, "What are you doing here, setting up this damn sign?" Aberforth held a frozen salted fish in his left hand and a tattered wooden sign with a picture of a severed boar's head in his right. "It was blown away by the snow last night. I searched all morning and finally found it in the Shrieking Shack." "Hey, Sherry, Hermione." "Good morning." Sherry and Hermione greeted him and then hurried over to help Aberforth mount the sign on a hanging bracket. After finishing, the four headed towards the bar. Aberforth glanced at Ralph and asked, "I received your Christmas present yesterday. Do you have any more?" "Give me some more." Ralph raised an eyebrow. He had given him a local Indian specialty, curry made with Gang's water and cow urine. Was Aberforth really that fond of such things? "I still have some," Ralph said curiously. "Aberforth, do you like curry?" "No." The old man shook his head. "Then why do you still want some?" "For Albus." Aberforth pushed open the bar door and answered expressionlessly, "I put some curry in his food this morning, and I saw him go to the toilet several times, so I wanted some more of that stuff." "So, is Professor Dumbledore still in the bar?" Ralph asked cautiously. "He's gone," Aberforth snorted coldly, saying sarcastically, "The great Dumbledore left England half an hour ago to save the wizards in Austria." "Austria?" Ralph was stunned, thinking to himself, Dumbledore wouldn't have gone to Nurmengard again to find Grindelwald, would he? The boy glanced at Aberforth's expression and became even more certain of this idea. He couldn't help but sigh, going against his family's wishes, having a cross-border relationship, one of them having a criminal record and currently serving time in a labor camp. It's like having all the buffs stacked up. Isn't this true love? The four of them entered the bar, which was as dirty and messy as ever, but the fireplace was burning, making the room warm. Aberforth walked ahead, asking gruffly, "It's quite a distance from here to Godric's Hollow. How are you three planning to get there?" "We're going to take the night bus," Ralph said. "That's too much trouble. Use the fireplace, it leads to our old house in Godric's Hollow," Aberforth said, pulling a key from his pocket and tossing it to Ralph. He said sternly, "You three, once you're inside, don't touch anything, understand?" "Thank you, Aberforth," Ralph smiled, taking the key. He then asked, "By the way, what exactly do you want me to bring to Bathilda Bagshot?" Aberforth went to the bar, extended his wand, and tapped an old wooden money box. The drawer slid open automatically, spitting out something that landed heavily on the floor. Ralph stared at the object, his pupils dilating instantly in shock. Chapter 658 Aberforth's Gift. As flue powder was sprinkled into the fireplace, a series of blurry fireplace stars flashed before Ralph's eyes, and his body spun rapidly amidst the roaring, leaping green flames. When the dizziness subsided, his feet landed firmly on the ground, and he found himself in an unfamiliar room. It was a living room with Victorian-style wallpaper on the walls and a chandelier hanging from the ceiling, adorned with small golden phoenix figurines. On a cherry wood round table sat a vintage-style sewing machine and an old-fashioned radio. Pale golden sunlight streamed into the room through stained glass windows, which were decorated with paintings depicting scenes from the love story of Tristan and Isolde. The entire living room had a distinctly 19th century style. It wasn't large, but it was exceptionally clean. Shirley, who had crossed the fireplace, walked to Ralph's side. She also looked around the room and exclaimed in surprise, "It's so clean. Does anyone live here?" The living room was indeed excessively clean, not at all like an uninhabited place, but neither Dumbledore nor Aberforth would normally live here. Above the fireplace hung a portrait, in which a blonde girl suddenly appeared. She spoke softly to Sherry, "No one else lives here, but Aberforth often comes back to clean. He's very clean." Hearing this, Ralph smirked. If he hadn't just come from the Hog's Head, he almost would have believed her. Saying Aberforth was clean was practically saying Snape was a germaphobe. However, Ralph didn't refute it. Instead, he looked at Ariana with interest. He'd seen the girl many times, but this was the first time he'd heard her speak. Ralph planned to get close to Ariana. If he could control her, he could control Aberforth. Then, if he bought anything from the Hog's Head, he could at least get a drastically reduced price, if not free. "Hello, Ariana, my name is Ralph Scamander. You know me, right?" "Yes," Ariana said timidly, looking at the boy. "Aberforth often mentions you." "Mentions me?" Ralph asked with a smile. "What did he say about me?" Aberforth said. Ariana honestly replied, "You're a smooth-talking jerk, a master at deceiving girls, and he told me to talk to you less." Ralph's smile faded, but it didn't disappear. Instead, it shifted to Sherry and Hermione's faces. Sherry was somewhat restrained, only pursing her lips and secretly smiling. Hermione didn't hide her schadenfreude. She nodded in agreement with a face full of satisfaction. Ralph was speechless, forcing a smile, and awkwardly said, "Aberforth might have some misunderstandings and prejudices against me." "Oh dear, look at this." Ralph abruptly changed the subject, pointing to the photograph next to Ariana's portrait, and Sherry and Hermione's attention was immediately drawn to it. It was a family portrait, featuring Dumbledore's father, Percival, a very handsome middle-aged man. Dumbledore's mother, Kendra, was also a striking beauty, with jet black hair styled in a high bun, dark eyes, high cheekbones, and a straight nose. Albus and Aberforth, probably only 5 or 6 years old, wore matching lace-collared blouses and had the same flowing hair. Ariana was still an infant, held in Kendra's arms, her arms flailing indistinctly outside her swaddling clothes. The Dumbledore family appeared quite happy and content, but Ralph knew that this happiness wouldn't last more than a few years before turning into a tragedy of family ruin. The three looked at the photographs for a while, followed Aberforth's instructions, and left the living room without touching anything, entering a courtyard that wasn't too big or too small. The courtyard was piled high with snow, and under a bare tree stood a swing, clearly the swing Ariana had used. It seemed that although the old house was no longer inhabited, it still maintained its layout from 100 years ago, and neither Dumbledore nor Aberforth had any intention of changing it. Ralph took out his key, opened the gate, and they left the yard. They'd only walked a few meters when the house disappeared from sight. "Should we go to the cemetery first, or go find Bathilda Bagshot?" Shirley asked Ralph. "How about the cemetery first?" Hermione suggested. Although Bathilda Bagshot was a renowned expert on the history of magic, and Hermione was eager to meet her and discuss magical history, considering the overpowered items Aberforth had given Ralph, she thought it best to avoid it. Otherwise, they might easily get beaten up. Ralph also hesitated. After much deliberation, he decided to go find Bathilda Bagshot first. After all, he also had some questions he wanted to ask her. Following the address given by Aberforth, the three wandered through the village, turning left and right, finally passing through a neglected vegetable garden and arriving at an old house. Ralph knocked hard on the door, and after a moment, the door opened and an elderly witch came out. She was very old, with sparse white hair, age spots all over her face, a long, wrinkled neck that stretched across her thin, bony shoulders, and a drooping, sagging chin. Mrs. Bathilda Bagshot, "Hello, I'm Ralph Scamander," Ralph greeted her. "Do you remember me?" The old woman looked at Ralph, her eyes sunken deep in the folds of her translucent skin, revealing thick cataracts. She thought for a moment, then answered in a frail voice, "Yes, you are Newt's grandson. We met at Nico's funeral that summer." Ralph was pleased that Bagshot remembered. He smiled and said, "We have come to visit you on Aberforth's behalf." "Oh, Aberforth," Bagshot nodded. "Come in with me." She walked unsteadily into the room, followed by Ralph, Sherry, and Hermione. They entered a dark living room. Bagshot picked up a match and lit the candles. The candles were scattered everywhere, some standing on saucers, some propped up on piles of books, or on small tables piled with moldy, broken cups. Bagshot's trembling hands made it seem as if she wasn't lighting candles, but rather setting the house on fire. Sherry and Hermione quickly stepped forward to help her light the candles one by one. Bagshot sat on the sofa and asked, "So, did you bring that thing?" "Yes," Ralph gave Sherry a look, and the girl opened the box. Together, they pulled out a wooden coffin. "Madam, this is a Christmas gift Aberforth asked me to bring you," Ralph said, pointing to the coffin. "He wishes you good health and a long life." Sherry, Hermione. Chapter 659 The owner of the wooden coffin. Coffins are inherently unlucky, let alone as a gift, especially for an elderly person at Christmas. Is this a gift or a funeral? So, upon first seeing Aberforth's gift, Ralph was shocked and secretly wondered, was he not coming himself because he feared Bathilda Bagshot might see the coffin and not catch her breath, turning the holiday into a funeral? Then the coffin was truly put to good use. But ultimately, Ralph agreed to help deliver the coffin, for a simple reason: it looked too familiar. The wooden coffin had no inscriptions, only a simple design on the lid, a triangular eye with a vertical line in the pupil. Ralph had seen two identical coffins in the ghost ship and in Ravenclaw's grave. Add to that the coffin Newt saw in the Centaur tribe, and the coffin in Hogwarts Castle mentioned by Dumbledore. This was the fifth wooden coffin. Of course, the only difference between this coffin and the ones Ralph had seen before was that it had already been opened. There was a huge gap in the coffin lid, cut by a sharp weapon, and the coffin was empty, with no burial goods or remains. Bagshot, her back hunched, walked to the wooden coffin. She examined it closely, her aged fingers tracing the patterns inch by inch on the coffin, her voice trembling as she said, "Merlin, it's it. I never thought a legend was true." Hermione's curiosity was piqued. She asked, "Mrs. Bagshot, what legend?" Bagshot didn't answer directly. Instead, she pointed to the triangular eye on the coffin and said in her aged voice, "Child, do you recognize this symbol, the Deathly Hallows?" Ralph said. "The vertical line represents the Elder Wand, the circle above it is the Resurrection Stone, and the triangle represents the Invisibility Cloak." "That's the saint's interpretation," Bagshot scoffed. "But this interpretation actually distorts the original meaning of the symbol." "Distorted?" Ralph asked doubtfully. "You mean, this symbol doesn't represent the Deathly Hallows?" "Of course not." Bagshot raised her head, her cataract-covered eyes fixed on Ralph, and asked, "Child, do you know when the idea of the Deathly Hallows first appeared?" Ralph was momentarily speechless. He truly didn't know this. He thought for a moment and guessed, after the Peveril brothers obtained the Elder Wand, the Resurrection Stone, and the Invisibility Cloak, not that long ago. Bagshot shook his head. The term Deathly Hallows originated in the mid-15th century, the 15th century. Ralph was astonished. He had always believed that the term Deathly Hallows had circulated in the wizarding world for at least 1,000 years. How could it only be 500 or 600? Is there any evidence? He asked. Of course, Bagshot smiled. I once asked Nico, and when he was young, he had never heard of any Deathly Hallows. It wasn't until he was over 100 years old that the wizarding world suddenly started talking about them. Well, Nicholas Flamel was born in the 14th century. What was history to others was merely an experience to him. Using his experience as evidence was indeed very convincing. Ralph thought for a moment, then asked doubtfully, that's not right. The Elder Wand has been recorded for a long time, I know, Bashet said slowly, her gaze seemingly piercing through Ralph. I wrote in the History of Magic that the demon Emeric was killed in a duel with the evil Egbert, and his wand was taken from him. The one that was taken was the Elder Wand. And this happened in the early Middle Ages, more than 1,000 years ago? Then why did you just say that the term Deathly Hallows only appeared 500 or 600 years ago? Ralph asked, puzzled. Child, Bagrat's pale, hazy eyes stared intently at Ralph. The Elder Wand, the Invisibility Cloak, and the Resurrection Stone have been circulating in the wizarding world for a long time. The concept of the Deathly Hallows is a later development and doesn't conflict with it. In fact, for a considerable period of history, the three were completely unrelated, Bagrat said calmly. Wizards have all heard stories of powerful wands, and for many centuries they appeared under different names and were possessed by different wizards, but the Invisibility Cloak and the Resurrection Stone are different. They circulated steadily and privately within a few families with Peveril blood. Therefore, they were hardly famous, and no one compared them to the Elder Wand, until the 15th century. Bagrat paused, then continued in his aged voice, a wizard compiled the story of the three brothers and death, and people gradually learned about the Invisibility Cloak and the Resurrection Stone. Ralph was taken aback. Beethoven, the bard, that's right, Bagshot nodded. This 15th century bard from Yorkshire, England, compiled the Beatles' tales, and was the first to write the story of the Peveril brothers and death. Beetle was also the first to propose the concept of the Deathly Hallows. He claimed that by collecting all three Deathly Hallows, one could conquer death and become its master. So wizards began to flock to find the Deathly Hallows, and Beetle himself founded the saints and gathered them on a journey to find death. After a moment of silence, Ralph looked at the triangular eye on the coffin and asked curiously, was this symbol also designed by Beetle? No. Bagshot shook his head. This symbol has a long history, longer than the Elder Wand or even the history of all mankind. It comes from the land of ancient wizards. Ancient wizards? Ralph was stunned. He hadn't expected this answer. What does it truly mean? Death and resurrection, Bashet explained. The triangle represents the pyramids. Ancient wizards would bury themselves in pyramids. The circle is the heart, and the vertical line in the middle represents the corpse of an ancient wizard. The whole symbol means that the heart of a corpse buried in a pyramid will beat again. This symbol, as a funeral amulet, would be carved by ancient wizards on the coffins and tombstones of the deceased. If you look at the tomb of Ignatius Peveril, you'll see this symbol on his tombstone. Ralph pondered. So this symbol was used by ancient wizards for the dead. Does that mean this coffin contains the remains of an ancient wizard? Ralph guessed. Bashet stared at Ralph with her cloudy eyes. She placed her hands back on the wooden coffin, touching it almost caressingly. More accurately, it's the remains of the last ancient wizard. Legend has it that he was divided into 5 parts and placed in 5 wooden coffins, and this is one of them. Chapter 660 The Sealed Right Arm. 10,000 years ago, a cataclysmic disaster struck, destroying the magical kingdom that ruled the world. Bagshot recounted the past in a deep voice. After that cataclysmic disaster, the surviving ancient wizards still wanted to continue ruling the world, but they were resisted by humans, goblins, giants, and centaurs, their former slaves. They formed an alliance and won victory after victory, but when facing the last ancient wizard, they could not kill him no matter what they did. In the end, the alliance forged a weapon and cut his body into 5 pieces, sealing them in 5 wooden coffins. The old man patted the wooden coffin and said, "This is one of the coffins." Bagshot's description was not much different from what Hufflepuff had said. Ralph thought for a moment and asked curiously, "Madam, Where did you find this wooden coffin? That involves another secret. Bagshot hunched over, holding a candle, and walked towards a bookshelf against the wall. After the war with the ancient wizards ended, representatives of humans, elves, giants, and centaurs held a far-reaching meeting. Of course, the representatives who attended the meeting probably didn't realize that it would determine the magical worlds, Jiju, a term referring to the overall structure or pattern. For the next 10,000 years, the old man shakily pushed open a cabinet and took out a book covered in dust with a rotten cover. This book was written by Agnor Peveril, who participated in that conference and recorded its contents on parchment. Bashet blew away the thick layer of dust from the book, carefully turning a page with one finger. She read aloud, the faded ink still visible. At the conference, the representatives of the various tribes disagreed on the handling of the wooden coffins. The goblins revealed their greedy nature, believing they had contributed the most. They demanded not only 2 coffins but also the weapon used to dismember the wizard's body. The goblins' demands greatly displeased the representatives of the other tribes. They cursed and argued, shouting at each other throughout the conference. Bashet finished reading, put down the book, and sighed softly. The conference lasted 3 sessions, ultimately breaking down, and the Allied forces disintegrated overnight. Then, war broke out again. But no longer between the Allied forces and the ancient wizards, but between the Allied forces themselves. They fought fiercely, turning the world upside down, leaving rivers of blood. Hearing this, Ralph couldn't help but sigh as well. Humans, elves, giants, and centaurs united to overthrow the ancient wizards who held high above all others, enslaving them and arbitrarily controlling life and death, only to turn around and fight tooth and nail for spoils of war. How ironic. Perhaps the most tormented was the ancient wizard who was dismembered. The enemy he couldn't defeat crumbled in this way. It's rather dark humor. Madam, who ultimately won that war? Hermione asked curiously. Of course, it was us. Bashet seemed a little tired. She walked to a chair and slowly said, our ancestors made a secret agreement with the giants. They could obtain that incredibly powerful weapon, so we gained the giants' support. Seeing the situation was unfavorable, the centaurs also turned to us at a crucial moment. Under the combined attack of the 3 sides, the goblins were ultimately defeated and surrendered. Bashet relaxed in a high-backed chair. She raised her head and opened her eyes, which were covered by white film, and said, as a reward for surrendering, the centaurs received a wooden coffin, the giants took the weapon, and we took 3 more wooden coffins, and the goblins received nothing and were forced to submit to us. Thus, after the ancient wizarding kingdom was destroyed, our ancestors took over their titles and became the wizards of the new era, beginning to rule this world. And the descendants of the earliest wizards became the illustrious pure-blood families of later generations. Bashet paused, as if waiting for Rolf and the others to fully understand what she was saying, before continuing. As for the goblins, they harbored a deep grudge against us ever since. Although they outwardly submitted to the wizards, they always plotted to overthrow our rule. This is the true source of the Goblin Rebellion over thousands of years. Listening to these things that would never be recorded in magical history, not only Sherry and Hermione, but even Ralph was completely absorbed. I've always wanted to find the whereabouts of the wooden coffins to prove that the ancient wizards really existed, and weren't just legends, Bagshot said slowly. So, I began searching for clues in magical history. The simplest way was definitely to start with the 3 wooden coffins that humans obtained. Bagshot took out a handkerchief, gently wiped his mouth, and continued, according to records from multiple families, the wooden coffins fell into the hands of 3 wizards, whose names were Peveril, Ravenclaw, and Slytherin. Ralph narrowed his eyes. He had heard Hufflepuff mention this before. The Slytherin family had always preserved their right arm, while the Ravenclaw family possessed their left arm. Salazar Slytherin had once suggested completing the body of the ancient wizard and demanded Ravenclaw's left arm, but she refused. This is a possible reason why our Ravenclaw was killed by Slytherin. But unfortunately, Ravenclaw and the Peveril family have long since vanished into the annals of history. Bagshot lamented again. Both families possessed the wooden coffins, and their whereabouts are unknown. Ralph and Sherry exchanged a secret glance. The wooden coffins were not missing, but rather in their hands. Bagshot, oblivious to the exchange between the two, said softly, I turned my attention back to Slytherin. Although that name has also disappeared, it has descendants, the Gaunt family, so, I found my former Hogwarts classmate, Lothar Gaunt, and consulted their family records. Finally, I discovered an important record. The old woman straightened up abruptly, saying, A wooden coffin was bequeathed by Siab Gaunt to his youngest daughter, Leona Gaunt. Upon hearing this name, Ralph visibly paused, a look of astonishment on his face. Sherry, noticing the change in the boy's expression, asked softly, "Ralph, have you heard of this name?" Ralph nodded. "When I was little, my grandmother told me the story of Aesop Searle, the founder of Evermorny." Aesop Searle's mother was Leona Gaunt. "That's right," Baggett said. "Do you know how Aesop Searle's parents died?" "When Aesop Searle was 5 years old, her parents died in a fire," Ralph said familiarly. "When she was little, she was adopted by her aunt, Gormley Gaunt, and according to the stories passed down in Evermorny, the fire that burned Aesop Searle's parents to death was started by her aunt, Gormley Gaunt." Sherry and Hermione both looked surprised. Hermione was even more puzzled. Why would Gormley Gaunt kill her own sister and brother-in-law? Maybe it was for the wooden coffin, or maybe not. "We no longer know the real reason," Baggett said. "But with Leona Gaunt's death, the coffin undoubtedly fell into the hands of her sister, Gormley Gaunt." Gormley Gaunt adopted her niece, Aesop Searle, who later escaped aboard the famous Mayflower to the New World. Gormley Gaunt pursued her relentlessly, ultimately being killed by Aesop Searle. Baggett raised his head, his eyes, clouded by white film, fixed on the coffin. "Gormley Gaunt died suddenly, and since she had no descendants, I deduced that the wooden coffin was still hidden in her house, but she's been dead for centuries, and no one alive knows the exact location of her house, only that it was in the Combury Valley in County Kerry, Ireland. I investigated for many years, consulted numerous sources, and questioned many ghosts before I determined the approximate location of Gormley Gaunt's house, and then had Aberforth help me break the magic surrounding the house," Bassett exclaimed. "I never imagined he would actually find the wooden coffin in the house." After listening, Ralph couldn't help but admire Bassett's patience, meticulousness, and ability to unravel the mystery. "So the questions are, who destroyed the wooden coffin? And where is the ancient wizard's right arm from inside the coffin?" If you are listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means it was downloaded and re-uploaded without effort. We warmly invite you to visit our channel, Fanfic World. There you will find the original version of this story and many other novels of various genres. We look forward to seeing you dive into a world of incredible novels. Chapter 661: The Black Wizard's Attack. Ralph had been close to the wooden coffins in Ravenclaw's tombs before, and he had tried various methods, including but not limited to the fiend fire spell, but he couldn't even create a scratch, let alone damage the coffin. Yet this coffin before him had a huge gap, and Ralph was very curious about who had made it and how. Bassett rose again, hunching over, and walked to the coffin. She ran her fingers over the gap and slowly said, "This coffin was jointly crafted by humans, goblins, centaurs, and giants, and according to records, it was impervious to all magic. To cause this level of damage, perhaps only the weapon used to dismember the ancient wizard could have done it, but unfortunately," Bassett sighed regretfully. "With the mysterious death of Andalvi, the last king of the giants brilliant civilization was long lost to history, and that weapon is nowhere to be found." Ralph narrowed his eyes. He suddenly remembered meeting Corvinus Gaunt at the Upper Barnton Giants Village ruins near his home half a year ago. Gaunt was excavating the giant city, taking Ralph, Sherry, and Newt deep into the ruins, where they found the remains of the last king, Andalvi. Looking back now, his true purpose was probably to find that weapon, right? Since Corvinus Gaunt was searching for that weapon, it means he couldn't have split open the coffin. Could it have been his ancestor, Salazar Slytherin? After all, Slytherin always wanted to piece together the bodies of the ancient wizards. As Ralph pondered, Shirley suddenly asked, "MRS. Bagshot, you just said the wizard got 3 coffins, the centaur got 1, what about the third one?" Bagshot's cloudy eyes shifted to the ponytail girl's face, and she said in a hoarse voice, "During that war, due to the struggle between various forces, it accidentally sank into the sea and has been lost without a trace ever since." The old man found the book on the bookshelf behind him and waved it, saying, "In the thousands of years that followed, there were countless eyewitness accounts. Many wizards and muggles saw a wooden coffin floating in the sea, but no one actually got it." Shirley and Hermione both looked at Ralph, and Bagshot, seeing this, asked with a puzzled expression, "Child, what, have you seen that coffin?" Ralph nodded. "Last summer, I was traveling to America on the Mayflower when I encountered a ghost ship. Behind the ship, it was dragging a wooden coffin with the symbol of the Deathly Hallows engraved on it. Such an experience is rare and precious," Bassett said enviously. In fact, when I was young, I heard of sightings and searched the nearby sea for a long time, but I never found the wooden coffin. It seems it can only be encountered by chance. When you really want to find it, it's gone," Bashet said regretfully. Rolf wanted to ask more questions when he suddenly heard an explosion in the distance. He immediately went to the window and looked out, seeing an orange fireball shooting into the sky. Rolf handed the box he was carrying to Shirley behind him and instructed, "You two stay here to protect Mrs. Bashet. If you encounter enemies, hide in the box. I'll go check what happened." The boy finished speaking, opened the window, and flew into the sky. In the churchyard, rows of tombstones stood in the snow, dazzling red, gold, and green lights weaving among them, the spells like stained glass projections on the snow. Tonks felt a green light was past her left ear. She instinctively ducked behind a tombstone, raising her wand and shouting, "Stun!" A red light shot from her wand, striking a hooded wizard who fell backward into a snowdrift. 3 enemies left, Mundungus, Tonks shouted into the distance. "Let's not stray too far apart, or we'll be picked off one by one." A short, stout man with a stubble beard and a tattered coat lay crouched behind a grave. He had just looked up when he saw a series of blinding, scorching lights flash overhead. A strong gust of wind whipped Mundungus's hair, and he shrank back into the grave, fearfully saying, "No, there are too many enemies, we can't win. I'll go get help, Tonks, you hold on here." I'm going." With a piercing sound, Mundungus vanished. "Mundungus, I'll kill you," Tonks cursed angrily. But the sound gave away her location, and several spells rained down, shattering the tombstone in front of her. Tonks had no choice but to roll away to another grave, moving with the agility of a monkey. A wizard gestured to his companions to draw attention ahead, while he crouched low, cautiously circling behind Tonks, preparing for a sneak attack. He quickly reached Tonks's back, noticing a snowman standing before a grave, but paying it little heed, tiptoeing around the grave towards Tonks. Crunch! A strange footstep sounded, and the man whirled around, seeing the snowman had actually moved. In the instant their eyes met, the snowman pounced on the man like an arrow, knocking him to the ground. The man felt the snow rubbing against his disheveled beard and chapped lips. Hearing the movement of the snowman he had set up, Tonks also whirled around, waving his wand. "Petrify them all," the man froze, his body as stiff as an ice sculpture in the snow. But the next second, Tonks felt a spell slice through the air, striking the back of her head. She felt dizzy and couldn't even remember how she fell. When she opened her eyes again, she found herself lying on the ground, her ears ringing, her mouth full of blood. She reached for something to support herself as she tried to get up, but her fingers touched nothing at all. A witch approached, staring at Tonks and chuckling, "I know you, you dead horror. I have many companions who have been captured by you and imprisoned in Azkaban. Today, you've fallen into my hands, and I guarantee I'll make you wish you were dead." She raised her wand and screamed, crushing heart. Tonks' new wonder awaited her. She slowly closed her eyes, but after a moment, instead of pain, she heard a woman scream. Tonks quickly opened her eyes and saw the woman hanging upside down in midair, writhing in agony. Through the woman's silhouette, she stared blankly at the sky, where a handsome young man descended gracefully. Rolf glanced at Tonks, whose mouth was covered in blood, then looked at the witch hanging in midair, and smiled. "You dark wizards are quite amusing, even choosing your own graves. Very well. Since it's Christmas, I'll grant your wish." He raised his wand and said, "Crucible." Chapter 662 Voldemort's New Servant? The witch hung suspended in midair, howling in agony, her body writhing and thrashing wildly like an earthworm. Rolf, still having questions, stopped after a brief punishment and looked at Tonks with concern, asking, "Are you alright?" "I'm fine," Tonks replied, but coughed up a mouthful of blood, clearly seriously injured. Rolf helped Tonks to his feet, puzzled. "Why are you the only one guarding here, and that old bastard Mundungus?" Tonks said bitterly, "He abandoned me and ran away when things got bad." Abandoning a companion and running away, that sounded more like something Death Eaters would do. "Be careful," Tonks weakly warned. "This woman has a companion." Before he could finish, a white light flashed, moving rapidly through the snow, passing the witch with lightning speed, and lunging at the two of them. Using the witch's cover, such a sneak attack was difficult for most people to react to, at least Tonks hadn't. But with his spider-like senses, Ralph pushed Tonks aside at the last second, using the momentum to dodge the white rainbow himself. Tonks fell to the ground again, his face making intimate contact with the earth, yelping face first. "Ralph, be careful," he cried. "Sorry, Tonks, I'll be more careful next time." Ralph raised his hand, a chilling aura condensing in his palm, instantly freezing the moisture in the air into flakes of ice. Ice blade. The ice condensed into ice blades, which, under the boy's control, shot towards the distant enemy like arrows. The swirling snowflakes in the sky were instantly shattered by the ice blades. Seeing this, the sorcerer immediately hid behind a tombstone, simultaneously casting an ironclad charm on it. The ironclad charm blocked the ice blades, flashing rapidly like a screen, but as the ice blades continued to shoot, the flashing light grew weaker and weaker. The ironclad curse was finally broken. The ice blade struck the tombstone, the viscous liquid scattering like raindrops, splashing onto the stone and the ground. Ralph had created a liquid with magic, similar to the rock thief's mouth liquid, that could react with rocks to form explosive bomb rocks. So, with a flick of his finger, he launched a fireball high into the air, which landed on the bomb rocks, and calmly said, "Explode." A deafening roar followed, and the entire tombstone, along with the grave of who knows who, was blasted away by Ralph, the sorcerer's body also thrown by the blast wave. The woman, suspended in midair, took advantage of a lull in Ralph's fight with his companion to pull another wand from her sleeve and lower herself down. She intended to take Tonks hostage and force the despicable boy to surrender, but as soon as she stood up, a vine wrapped around her hair, dragging her to Ralph's feet like an animal. The witch, enduring the pain, raised her wand, but the next second, Ralph kicked her in the chest. She was sent flying 2 or 3 meters, her back slamming heavily against a tombstone. She collapsed to the ground, struggled a couple of times, and then passed out. Ralph looked into the distance. The wizard was flying away over the wall in the shockwave. Tonks weakly got up and asked, "Aren't we going to chase him? What if he gets away?" "He won't get away." Ralph raised his arm, and 2 chairs materialized from ice and snow. He plopped down on one and said, "I have a clone outside. I'll heal your wounds first." The woman felt as if her chest was about to burst. She slowly opened her eyes and found herself suspended in midair again. Her heart sank. She looked up and saw Ralph sitting on an ice chair, healing the wounds of the female auror named Tonks. Ralph turned to her and asked, "Auntie, tell me your story in detail." "Of course, you don't have to tell me, but I'll use very cruel methods to torture you into confessing." Tonks, listening to Ralph's threats, pretended not to hear as an auror and focused on enjoying his treatment. Without hesitation, the woman spilled everything she knew. "My name is Cantor, and my partner and I run a small hospital in Nocturne Alley." "Hey, I didn't realize we were in the same line of work," Ralph chuckled. "I'm a veterinarian." "What's your main business?" Cantor hesitated for a moment, then explained hesitantly, "We help people with organ transplants. We can help wizards who need kidneys or corneas." Tonks frowned. "Where do you get your human organs?" Cantor cautiously replied, "We lure wizards and muggles here through recruitment, then attack them to get the organs." Ralph smirked and continued, "How did you get here?" "Someone paid us to exhume the Potter's remains. They'd give us 5,000 galleons if we succeeded," Cantor said. "Who hired you?" Ralph asked. "A witch," Cant said. "Her name is Minette Barreau. She was one of our former clients. She came in for a corneal transplant." Tonks frowned. "I know this witch. She was imprisoned in Azkaban for a while for attacking muggles, but she was released about 6 months ago." Ralph narrowed his eyes. Was Voldemort with this woman? In the distance, the wizard was thrown over the courtyard wall in the explosion, his back slamming heavily to the ground. He rolled several times before finally stopping. He coughed up a mouthful of blood and struggled to his feet. Although injured, the good news was that being blasted away meant the kid wouldn't be able to catch up with him so quickly. The man sat up, wiped his mouth, and sighed, "A tomb raiding mission, and I even run into the infamous Scamander. Money talks, but the consequences are tough. Too bad his head is more valuable, but too dangerous." He stood up, ignoring his companions, and prepared to apparate away when a voice suddenly sounded behind him. "Oh, is my head that valuable?" The man felt a chill run down his spine. He turned around and saw a boy holding a nice umbrella, standing in the snow, smiling broadly at him. The man smiled wryly. "How did you move so fast?" "Guess," Ralph chuckled. The man, of course, didn't have time to guess. He abruptly raised his wand, aiming it at the boy. Scamander, one hand in his pocket, the other holding the umbrella, hadn't even taken his wand, So arrogant. He certainly wouldn't miss this opportunity. But before he could even utter the first letter of Avada Kedavra, a dazzling bolt of lightning crashed down. The man collapsed to the ground, smoking. Ralph, still holding his umbrella and hands in his pockets, chuckled. Fun fact, the speed of light is faster than the speed of sound. For a wizard, that must be some kind of fun fact, right? Chapter 663 Rove's Doubts. For most wizards, their education before the age of 11 is fragmented, received at home. This perfectly aligns with Grandma Gia's comment. They only know a few words, they're not completely blind, therefore, questions like which is faster, the speed of light or the speed of sound, might truly be considered obscure knowledge for them. However, whether the knowledge is obscure or not is unimportant, what matters is that for that wizard, his body, after being electrocuted, truly began to grow cold. Kant, suspended in midair, saw yet another Ralph Scamander appear, her face filled with shock. Seeing him bring his dead companions, she turned ashen-faced. She had just been fantasizing that her teammates could turn the tables, and they could then use the Potter's remains and Scamander's head to exchange for money. Now they were all wiped out. Ralph merged with his clone, summoning a silver patronus, and rushed towards Bathilda Bagshot's house. This was both to let Sherry and Hermione know he was safe and to reassure them, and also to have them visit the cemetery. Footsteps sounded in the distance. Tonks immediately raised his wand alertly. At the entrance appeared a short, stout man with a stubble beard and a middle-aged man with red hair. It was Mundungus, who had returned, bringing Arthur Weasley with him. Mundungus cautiously held his wand, hiding behind the wall with each step, wary of any potential enemies. He played a game of cat and mouse with thin air for a while before finally seeing Tonks. He relaxed and smiled happily. Tonks, I'm so glad you're alright. I was so worried. If you were really that worried, you wouldn't have abandoned me and run away. Tonks sneered. I didn't run away, I went to get reinforcements, Mundungus said shamelessly. There are too many enemies, I was just being cautious. Oh, Ralph, you're here too, Mundungus greeted Ralph cheerfully. The last time the two met was in Azkaban, when Ralph was inspecting the lake where Dementors were born and encountered Mundungus, who was imprisoned for smuggling Class C prohibited goods. Seeing that Mundungus refused to admit his mistake, Tonks started arguing with him, seemingly determined not to back down. Mr. Weasley walked over to Ralph, panting, and said, I was at work when Mundungus suddenly came to me saying there had been an attack. Ralph, how is it? The attackers are all here, Ralph said. Tonks was a little injured, but nothing serious. Weasley looked at the captured wizards and exclaimed in shock, it's unbelievable that someone would actually dig up the Potter's remains. He had initially been puzzled by Dumbledore's order to send wizards to guard the graveyard, but now he had to admire the headmaster's foresight. Arthur, however, still couldn't understand why anyone would want to rob the Potter's grave. Ralph didn't explain. He glanced at Mundungus in the distance and whispered, Mr. Weasley, Mundungus will abandon his teammates and run away in crucial moments. Why send him, Ralph? There's no other way, Arthur said, his face full of worry. We need wizards to guard many places, Malfoy Manor, Harry and his aunt's house, even the Triwizard Tournament where the Death Eaters are participating. We're severely understaffed. Mundungus is an old member of the Order of the Phoenix. Although he has some flaws, he can still distinguish right from wrong on important matters. We had no other choice but to send him. Ralph's eyes suddenly flickered upon hearing this. When Sherry and Hermione arrived at the cemetery and found Ralph, they discovered him sitting in front of a grave, staring at a tombstone. The tombstone was extremely old and weathered, the name on it almost illegible. Rove pointed to the blurry triangular eye symbol on the tombstone and said softly, this should be the grave of Ignatus Peverell, the third of the three brothers. He turned to Shirley, who immediately understood, opened the black box, and took out the same kind of magic eye as Moody's. Rove took the glass eyeball, held it to his eye, and looked into Peverell's grave. Suddenly, his mouth gaped open, his handsome face a mixture of shock, confusion, and bewilderment. Both girls tensed up, Hermione asking anxiously, Ralph, what did you see? Ralph said with a shocked expression, I saw a coffin. Sherry hesitated, then asked, anything else? No. Hermione rolled her eyes, aren't you being ridiculous? What else would you expect to see in a tomb if not a coffin? Ralph chuckled, I was wondering if there were any burial goods, like some precious magical artifacts. Even if there were, they'd probably been stolen long ago, Sherry said. That's true. Let's go. Ralph stood up. Let's check out the other tombs. The three quickly arrived at the Dumbledore family's tomb, where a dark stone tablet bore the name Kendra Dumbledore, along with his birth and death dates and his daughter Ariana's name. There was another inscription, "Where treasures lie, so shall the heart lie." Looking at the tombstone, Ralph sighed inwardly. Aberforth broke Dumbledore's nose right here, but that was almost 100 years ago. Shirley took out a bouquet of white lilies she had prepared beforehand and placed them before the grave. The three of them observed in silence for a while before approaching the potter's grave. The potter's gravestone was made of white marble, engraved with James and Lily's names, along with the inscription, "The last enemy to be destroyed is death." The entire grave showed no signs of damage. Ralph observed it with his magic eye and whispered, "The bones in the coffin are intact. It seems Voldemort hasn't succeeded yet." "So you guessed right," Shirley thought for a moment and said, "Professor Trelawney's prophecy of one person dying really refers to Lily Potter." Hermione's expression was also complicated. She had always thought Trelawney was a fraud, but now it seemed there was some truth to it. "Now I'm a little uncertain," Ralph said after a moment of silence, shaking his head. "If Voldemort wants to be resurrected and needs Lily Potter's remains, he would definitely take it much more seriously, rather than spending money to hire a few unknown dark wizards to steal the remains. This is a matter of great importance concerning resurrection. No amount of caution is excessive, especially since Ralph replaced old Tom Riddle's bones last year, causing Voldemort's resurrection to fail. Voldemort would only be more cautious about the catalyst that could resurrect him, not as hasty as he is now." "You mean, Voldemort is deliberately diverting our attention," Shirley said. "That's exactly what I think," Ralph nodded. Mr. Weasley said we're short-handed right now, and Voldemort's actions are likely just a distraction. This would weaken the defenses of one of our positions, making it easier for him to attack." Just then, Sherry suddenly bent down and picked up a stone from the snow. Hermione asked curiously, "What's that?" "Looks like a fragment of a tombstone," Sherry said after examining it. "There's a name engraved on it." "Oh, it must have been destroyed by me during the battle," Ralph asked. "Whose grave is that?" Sherry said, "Chopper Abbott." Ralph's expression became strange. Hermione asked, "Is he someone we know?" Looks like Hannah's grandfather." Chapter 664 Gryffindor Castle. Ralph hadn't expected to accidentally injure Hannah's grandfather, allowing him to participate in a fireworks display years after his death. But then he realized that most of the graves here belonged to wizards, and their descendants were mostly attending Hogwarts. Whoever's grave he hit, it was an elder of Ralph's, so it wasn't surprising that he'd hit Hannah's grandfather. Despite the unsurprising nature of it, Ralph, filled with remorse, immediately used magic to retrieve the shattered bones from Hannah's grandfather's grave. He also placed flowers, a fruit platter, and burned some joss paper with Merlin's image on it as a small token of his respect. After burying Hannah's grandfather, Ralph, Sherry, and Hermione left the cemetery and strolled through Godric's Hollow. As the oldest wizarding village in England, it had been home to countless legendary wizards. The famous Gryffindor, of course, was a given, but it was also the home of the Golden Snitch. In the Middle Ages, the renowned craftsman Bowman Wright invented the Golden Snitch, successfully replacing the endangered Golden Flying Slinger as a Quidditch game item. To this day, Bowman Wright's Golden Snitch shop still operates in Godric's Hollow, home to the world's best Golden Snitch manufacturer. The village also contains the former home of Dorcas Wilbelef, famous for founding the Society of Desperate Witches. This society collected donations from wizards to help witches who were impoverished, experiencing relationship problems, or facing misfortune. However, since Rita Skeeter exposed the Society of Desperate Witches' average monthly salary of 20,000 galleons and the unclear destination of donations, wizards have become unwilling to donate. Ralph and his companions also visited the Troll Institute, where they saw the world's largest troll specimen. This Troll Institute was founded by Gwendolyn Oliphant, who was famous for studying the habits of trolls. She even presciently proposed the idea that trolls have a noble destiny, but after she encountered a troll in the Cotswolds and was killed with a single blow, the Research Institute began to transform, focusing on how to efficiently eliminate trolls. The three of them strolled around the village and even had lunch at Mrs. Bassett's house. After lunch, Rove finally met the person he was waiting for, Helena Ravenclaw. He had arranged with Helena long ago to come to Godric's Hollow after Christmas to search for the ruins of the Gryffindor family. However, Helena's attire didn't seem like she was there to search for the Gryffindor family's ruins. It looked more like she was attending a grand banquet. She wore a halter neck, deep V-neck dress, the neckline extremely daring, plunging 5 centimeters to her chest. The high-waisted, body-hugging design accentuated Helena's graceful figure, and the short train of the skirt made her even more sexy and elegant. Rove scrutinized Helena with an extremely critical eye, and had to admit, she was indeed quite beautiful. Sherry greeted Helena warmly, while Hermione stared at her with a look of utter disdain, as if she were a vixen. Helena, however, remained completely unfazed by Hermione, treating her like a mere pebble on the roadside, her gaze fixed primarily on Sherry. Helena had assumed this trip to Godric's Hollow would be a romantic getaway for her and Ralph. Damn it. Seeing the tension escalating between their stares, Ralph quickly stopped his judgmental glare and asked, Helena, can you still find the Gryffindor family's location? I just looked down from the sky. The landscape here hasn't changed much in 1,000 years, Helena said. Follow me. Helena led the three out of the valley, along a narrow path, climbing towards the summit. The path wasn't rugged, and they made their way slowly until they reached the top. The path ended there. Ralph walked to the edge of the cliff and looked down. He saw swirling clouds and a heavy fog, and even though he wasn't afraid of heights, a chilling feeling of loneliness washed over him. That sudden fear urged him to retreat. In fact, Ralph wasn't the only one with this feeling. Hermione and the already deceased Helena felt the same way. Sherry looked at the three who had suddenly stopped and asked, Why are you stopping? Are you going to rest here for a while? Go. Hermione looked at Sherry strangely. There's a cliff ahead, no path anymore. How are we supposed to go? A cliff? The girl with the ponytail was stunned. She looked up carefully and asked doubtfully, Isn't there a mountain path ahead? Where's this cliff? I don't see it. Sherry looked at Ralph, who also looked surprised, and hesitated before saying, Can't you see the mountain path? No. Ralph shook his head. In my view, there's no path ahead, only a cliff. Sherry was astonished. Helena raised an eyebrow at the girl and asked, Besides the mountain path, what else can you see? There's a castle at the top of the mountain, Shirley said. What does the tallest tower look like? Helena continued. Shirley observed for a moment, then exclaimed in surprise, It looks like the Gryffindor Tower at Hogwarts. That's right, Helena nodded. When I first saw that tower as a child, I also thought it looked a lot like the Gryffindor Tower. Later, my mother told me that Gryffindor built a Gryffindor Tower based on his own castle. Helena finished speaking and looked at the girl with the ponytail with considerable surprise. Since Gryffindor disappeared, his house has been shrouded in magic and can no longer be seen. Muggles and wizards who come here can only see a cliff. But why can you see the castle? Shirley fell silent. She suddenly remembered what Ralph had told her last night. Gryffindor, like her, was a disguised magus. Their eyes and hair were very similar. Could she really be related to Gryffindor? Ralph narrowed his eyes, pondering his next move. Sherry could see Gryffindor Castle, so they could continue, but Ralph couldn't let her go alone. It was too dangerous. Just as the boy was lost in thought, the ground suddenly trembled, and a branch sprouted from the solid rock. The slender branch abruptly wrapped around Ralph, dragging him towards the edge of the cliff. The instant they entered the mist, it dissipated as if by magic, revealing the distant scenery. Ralph looked up, lost in thought, and saw a castle perched atop a towering mountain. Its surface was made of the local characteristic purplish redstone, making the castle appear seamlessly integrated with the mountains, as if it had grown out of the landscape. Numerous towers gleamed, creating a truly awe-inspiring and massive structure. The next second, the branches dragged Ralph towards the mountain top. Chapter 665 The Man Who Hit Someone. Ralph was entangled in a tree branch and propelled rapidly upwards along the ridge, his speed increasing rapidly. Before he could even react, he was dragged from the mountainside to the summit, where he saw in the distance the culprit that had captured him, a tree. A very tall, large, green, and shimmering tree. It was almost as tall as a castle, over 30 meters high, with countless branches, many slender ones hanging straight down to the ground, reaching into the rocks, and taking root from them. Clumps of green leaves piled one on top of another, leaving no gaps. Their vibrant green color shone brightly in Ralph's eyes, as if a new life was trembling on every leaf. The tree also bore shimmering silver flowers, which, from a distance, resembled stars. From the shape of the leaves, Ralph recognized it as a willow tree, and his first thought was, getting hit by it must hurt terribly. It wasn't just pain, he'd probably be torn to pieces, turned into mincemeat. You see, The whomping willow is an extremely violent magical plant. Even getting close will result in an attack. Hogwarts has a whomping willow, only 3 meters tall but already incredibly ferocious, but compared to this one, it's like a tiny sapling just sprouting from the ground. Ralph couldn't even imagine how dangerous this whomping willow was. And he was speeding towards it at 280 miles per hour. Ralph never imagined that just this morning he'd blown up Grandpa Hannah's grave, tearing the old man's remains to pieces, and this afternoon he'd suffer the same fate. This karma had come too quickly. Ralph struggled violently, trying to escape the whomping willow's hold, but the branches, like pythons, reached in from his ankles, wrapped around his legs, then passed through his clothes, emerging from his collar, binding him tightly, completely immobile. Ralph flicked his finger again, instantly sending out several fireballs that spread rapidly along the branches, crackling and burning the leaves. But after being charred, the branches miraculously returned to their vibrant green in an instant, absorbing the flames. With the fire ineffective, Ralph used other spells, but none caused much damage to the branches. At this point, he was about to crash into the willow. The willow swayed its branches, resembling the tentacles of a sea monster, welcoming Ralph. Ralph had no choice but to cast defensive spells on himself, hoping to at least withstand the willow's onslaught. The next second, he crashed into the treetop like a cannonball. But strangely, the willow didn't attack Ralph. Instead, its branches, like thousands of slowly writhing white snakes, cushioned his fall. Ralph felt as if he had crashed into a remarkably soft bed. He bounced back, soaring into the air, only to be pulled back by a branch like a string, bouncing up again. This repeated several times, gradually slowing Ralph's speed until he finally landed safely on the canopy of the whomping willow. Ralph stood up, bewildered, and flew towards the ground. As he landed smoothly, the branch that had been binding him released its grip. Ralph took a step back, looked up, and examined this excessively gentle whomping willow. So, this thing didn't intend to attack him, but simply brought him here? Ralph pondered for a moment, then walked towards the base of the tree. Based on his experience, this peculiar whomping willow, like Grindelwald's elderberry and Ravenclaw's golden apple, probably came from Avalon. Therefore, there must be that blood-red face on the trunk as well. Ralph quickly reached the base of the tree, circled it, and indeed found the face. However, when he clearly saw the features of the face, his eyes widened instantly. It was as if he had seen a ghost in broad daylight. A fiery crossbow bolt, accompanied by a whistling sound of winds and thunder, flew at top speed to the mountain top. The bolt hovered in midair. Atop the broom sat a girl with a ponytail and a white robe, looking down at the ground, searching for Ralph. Sherry tried to approach the willow tree, but its branches immediately swayed, a whooshing sound filling the air as several branches shot towards her from all directions. Sherry dodged and weaved among the branches, anxiously calling out, "Ralph, where are you?" A moment later, a familiar voice replied, "I'm under the tree." "Willow tree, stop attacking." As Ralph's words fell, the willow tree's branches indeed fell silent instantly. Sherry's mind raced. She immediately tilted a broom downwards, flying towards the ground. Before the broom even stopped, she jumped down and hurriedly ran towards the foot of the tree. Seeing Ralph nod, the girl breathed a sigh of relief. She rushed towards the boy, grabbed his wrist, and asked anxiously, "Are you alright?" "I'm fine." Ralph gently took Sherry's hand and said softly, "This whomping willow brought me here, but it didn't hurt me." "Look." Sherry looked up in the direction Ralph was pointing and froze. She saw a face, but it wasn't a blood-red face, nor was it the Ravenclaw face she had seen on the olive tree before, but Ralph's face. How could this be? Sherry exclaimed in astonishment. "I don't know why my face appeared." Ralph frowned. According to Grindelwald, all the trees in Avalon had a blood-red face. But in Ravenclaw's chamber, Ralph had seen an olive tree with a Ravenclaw face, and this tree was even more bizarre. It had Ralph's face. This tree was planted in front of the Gryffindor family. Even if it were to grow, should it have a Gryffindor face? Ralph was completely baffled. He walked to the tree trunk and pressed his ear against his cheek. When he was near the bloodied faces of the elderberry and golden apple trees, he could hear a sound like a heartbeat, but there was no such beating on this face. Ralph only felt the texture of the bark and the life contained within the tree. Besides that, there was a joy of reunion, a joy that came from the living tree itself. In that instant, Ralph had a feeling he could control this whomping willow. So he asked, "Whomping willow, Can you bring Hermione and Helena in too?" As if understanding, the whomping willow quickly sprang 2 branches and headed towards the mountainside. A moment later, a shrill scream echoed in the sky, the voice trembling with sobs, much like a little girl on a drop tower at an amusement park. Help. Wah, Ralph, Sherry, someone save me." Ralph and Sherry exchanged a glance and said in unison, "Oh no, Hermione seems to have a fear of heights." Chapter 666 The Key to Gryffindor Castle. After Hermione's bungee jump, Ralph flew into the air, searching for her. The boy shouted, "Hermione, where are you?" A moment later, a muffled voice replied, "I'm here." "Ralph. I'm stuck. Please help me." Ralph followed the voice and quickly found Hermione. When he saw her position, he almost burst out laughing. Hermione was stuck headfirst in the tree canopy, her upper body wedged in branches, only half of her body sticking out, and she couldn't pull herself out. This position looks familiar. Ralph seems to have seen it in some movie before. Hermione swung her legs, urging, "Ralph, what are you doing? Hurry up and help me." Ralph said "Oh," and quickly bent down, grabbed Hermione's legs, and pulled her out like a radish. Hermione slumped in the treetop, still shaken, scratching her increasingly disheveled hair. "What happened?" she asked. Ralph blinked, inwardly thinking, if Hermione knew he'd had the whomping willow drag her here, she might kill him. He thought for a moment, then feigned ignorance. "I don't know what happened either. Let's go down quickly." Hermione nodded, struggling to her feet before slumping back down, her face contorted with grief. "Ralph, my legs are weak, I can't get up." Filled with guilt, Ralph scooped Hermione up in his arms and flew towards the ground, placing her under the tree trunk. Sherry took a bottle of tranquilizer from her chest and handed it to Hermione. After drinking a few sips of the potion, Hermione's emotions calmed considerably. Helena circled the willow of the brawler, noticing a human face on the trunk. After observing it for a while, she floated to Ralph's side, her face full of suspicion. "Strange, I've never seen this tree before when I visited Professor Gryffindor's house. Maybe Gryffindor planted it later," Sherry guessed. "Then why is Ralph's face on the trunk?" Helena asked. "Ralph, did you plant this tree?" She remembered Ralph telling her that he had used the time turner to travel back 1,000 years. This willow of the brawler was so tall, it couldn't have grown in just a few decades, it must have taken at least several hundred years. "It wasn't me." Ralph shook his head. "I've never been here before." "That's strange," Helena murmured. In fact, Ralph was also very curious. Why was his face on the willow of the brawler? Could it be Gryffindor viewing? But when Ralph traveled back 1,000 years, he hadn't spent much time with Gryffindor. Why would he do such a thing? "Forget about this tree for now, let's go check out the castle." The group walked towards the castle, and Ralph looked up, gazing at the magnificent building before him. It was a majestic stone fortress, its protruding, rugged stone walls giving it an air of grandeur. The towers reached 100 feet high, their awe-inspiring domes piercing the sky, and the massive Doric columns supporting the high vaulted ceilings added to its imposing aura. They climbed the steps, and before them stood a pair of enormous, 12-foot-high double stone doors, with a golden lion sculpted between the two doors. Ralph pushed hard on the stone doors, and as expected, they wouldn't budge. He then examined the pair of bronze door knockers. They weren't the usual griffin knockers, but rather imposing 3-headed lions. These magical knockers clearly also served to protect the castle. If anyone tried to force their way in, they would transform into 3-headed lions to attack the intruders. "I tried to pass through the wall, but I failed," Helena, now a ghost, said. "There's some defensive magic left on this wall, so we can't get in," Hermione said, somewhat disappointed. This was Godric Gryffindor's castle. They'd reached the gate, only to be stopped at the door. "What a pity. We probably can't get in," Helena sighed softly. "If only we knew where the castle key was." "The key?" "Yes," Helena pointed to the keyhole on the door. "There's a key to this door. Professor Gryffindor showed it to me once, and he said only that key could get into the castle, but I don't know where the key is. It's always been kept by Professor Gryffindor, and there's no spare." Helena paused, then continued, "After Gryffindor disappeared, I asked the Sorting Hat, and it said Gryffindor took the key." The group sighed. They were back to square one. After all, no one knew where Gryffindor was. Hermione tried the Alohomora opening charm and other unlocking charms, but to no avail. Ralph bent down and examined the keyhole. After a moment's thought, he said, Maybe a muggle method can open the lock? What's a muggle lock-picking method? Hermione asked curiously. Ralph smiled and pulled a wire from his pocket. Wizards may be wary of all sorts of magic, but they haven't thought about muggles, Ralph said confidently. Sometimes, you don't need fancy methods to pick locks, simplicity is key. As the saying goes, the greatest truths are the simplest. Watch closely. Hearing Ralph's words, the three girls looked at him expectantly. Ralph inserted the wire into the keyhole, fiddling around for a while, then with a snap, the wire broke inside. Ralph smiled awkwardly and quickly maneuvered the wire to get it out. Let's walk around the castle and see if there are any collapsed areas, Shirley suggested. Ralph glanced at the girl, then suddenly had a thought and asked, Helena, what does that key you mentioned look like? Helena hesitated, frowning as she recalled. I remember it was silver, like a muggle cross, but it was an isometric cross. The two intersecting lines were the same length. Helena suddenly frowned and said, Ralph, don't tell me you have that key. Ralph smiled and shook his head. I don't. Helena breathed a sigh of relief. She'd had too many frights today and didn't want any more. But then the boy's words startled her again. I don't have it, but I think I know who does. Who? Ralph looked at Shirley. She hesitated for a moment, then reached out her slender fingers and carefully pulled a silver chain from around her neck. At the end of the silver chain hung a peculiar cross. The girl with the ponytail swayed gently and asked softly, Helena, is this what the castle key you mentioned looks like? Helena. Chapter 667 The Death of Rove? Helena stared dumbfounded at Shirley and the silver pendant in her hand, completely stunned and utterly shocked. This was the key to Gryffindor Castle. Why was it on Shirley? Hermione also looked on in disbelief. Only Ralph remained relatively calm, relatively speaking. He did know that Shirley was connected to Gryffindor, but he never imagined that the pendant she had worn since childhood would be the key to the castle. Ralph suddenly remembered that he had taken the pendant back 1,000 years, but unfortunately, he hadn't shown it to Gryffindor, otherwise it would have certainly terrified him. After a long period of stunned silence, Helena finally came to her senses and asked, Shirley, where did you get this key? The nuns at the convent said it was on me when they found me. Shirley reached out and took the pendant off, clutching it tightly in her hand. I've always worn it around my neck as a protective charm. I see. Helena looked somewhat disappointed. Shortly after her mother Ravenclaw's death, Gryffindor disappeared, and Helena always suspected him. The reason was simple. After rejecting Barrow's advances, she was killed by him, driven by a destructive streak. Gryffindor had also loved her mother, only to be rejected in return. With Barrow's example, it was hard for Helena not to suspect that the missing Gryffindor had done the same thing. Shirley possessed the key, making her a likely descendant of Gryffindor. Her parents and elders might know the truth. But since Shirley was an orphan raised in a convent, she wouldn't be able to find anything. However, Helena believed that with her intelligence, she would eventually find evidence to prove Gryffindor's guilt. If Ralph knew Helena's thoughts, he'd probably remark, there are no wrong nicknames, only wrong names. Dumb beauty truly lives up to her name. Hermione, standing nearby, eagerly said, Shirley, come and try to open the door. Shirley nodded, walked to the door, inserted the key into the keyhole, and slowly pushed it in, inserting the entire key. But the door didn't budge. Just as Ralph was starting to doubt his guess, the door suddenly hummed and slowly opened, revealing a spacious foyer. Helena's lips curled slightly as she reminded him, before you go in, you'd better use the bubble hut charm. Ralph nodded. This castle probably hadn't been entered for many years. The air quality was extremely poor. Using the bubble hut charm for protection was indeed necessary. Wait, when did Helena become so clever? Ralph didn't think much of it, cast the bubble hut charm on himself, and strode into the foyer. He looked up, surveyed the room, and froze for a moment. The foyer was covered by a flat, large dome with pendentives, flanked by 8 Corinthian columns, their shafts exquisitely crafted, topped with delicate honeysuckle carvings, their frieze equally intricately decorated. Combined with the enormous windows, the foyer felt incredibly spacious and grand. But that wasn't the main point. The focus was on the interior decoration. The walls, floors, and dome were all covered in gold leaf. The columns, made of white marble, were also inlaid with the gold leaf. The junctions of the capitals, bases, and shafts were adorned with gilded copper bands. Even the windows were painted with gold powder, creating a dazzling, shimmering effect. Gold dust, golden particles, swirled in the air. These suspended particles blended with the brilliant sunlight streaming through the large windows, creating an atmosphere of extreme luxury. Ralph couldn't help but take a deep breath. Despite the bubble charm, he felt as if his lungs were coated in gold. Sherry and Hermione beside the boy were doing the same thing. Ralph sighed softly. No wonder Helena reminded them to use the bubble charm. That was the reason. He realized how ignorant he had been. He suddenly thought of his old Scamander house on the fertile plains, which, compared to Gryffindor Castle, was practically a slum. The Scamander family was indeed poor. But then again, Sherry had the only key to the castle, which meant the castle belonged to her, and rounding that up, wasn't the castle also Ralph's? Ralph walked around the foyer and, near the archway, noticed two imposing lion statues, made entirely of gold, with ivory teeth and gleaming jeweled eyes, clearly very valuable. They toured the foyer and followed a doorway into the living room. The place wasn't as luxurious as the foyer. In fact, it was extremely dilapidated. Thick dust covered everything, wooden shelves against the walls had collapsed, rotten wood had broken and crumbled, and the containers they held were scattered all over the floor, the smell of mildew permeating the entire room. Several portraits hung on the walls, framed in large gilded frames, but due to their age, the portraits had lost their magic and were completely immobile. The names written in bold below were also blurred. Just as Rove was looking around, searching for valuable magical items, Sherry's urgent voice suddenly rang out. "Rove, come quick, look at this." "What is this?" Rove immediately ran towards Sherry, and from afar he saw a large pool of blood on the ground. The blood had dried and congealed completely on the floor, as black as night. Beside the pool of blood was an open wooden box. Rove picked up the box and found that it was empty, without any inscriptions, except for a simple symbol on the lid, triangular eyes with a vertical line in the center of the pupil. The Deathly Hallows, no, it should be called the symbol of an ancient wizard. Ralph narrowed his eyes, staring intently at the box. For a fleeting moment, he recalled the scene of his own death he had seen in the death well in Ravenclaw. Two wizards stood facing each other. One was his future self, very tall, seemingly 16 or 17 years old. The other wizard had her back to him, but from her graceful figure, it was clear she was a young witch. Then, the young witch, holding a sword, suddenly plunged it deep into Ralph's chest. When she pulled her hand away, the sword remained inside. He groaned and fell to the ground. Beside their feet lay an open box. Ralph stared at the box in his hand. It was exactly the same as the box he had seen in the death well. The boy then looked at the pool of blood on the ground, and for some reason, a chill ran down his spine. If you are listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means it was downloaded and re-uploaded without effort. We warmly invite you to visit our channel, Fanfic World. There you will find the original version of this story and many other novels of various genres. We look forward to seeing you dive into a world of incredible novels. Chapter 668, Resurrecting Rowena and Ravenclaw. Before nightfall, Ralph led Sherry, Hermione, and Helena on a thorough tour of the castle's first floor. Aside from items that could be preserved for a long time, everything else, such as carpets and wooden tables, had long since decayed into dust. Ralph concluded that the castle hadn't been lived in or used for centuries. This raised a question. If Gryffindor had left the key to their descendants, why did they allow the castle to fall into disrepair instead of living there? And where were Sherry's parents, who left the key to their daughter? Ralph had many questions but no answers. He decided to stay for a while, thoroughly exploring the castle to see if there were any clues. This decision was unanimously approved by Sherry and Hermione. Sherry, of course, wanted to stay. She possessed the key. The castle essentially belonged to her, and it was also related to her past. As for Hermione, she had prepared a comprehensive study plan, even intending to read 50 books to pass the Christmas holidays. But compared to exploring this ancient castle, hesitating even for a second when choosing which to do would be disrespectful to Gryffindor, one of the four great masters. After nightfall, they stopped searching the castle and began preparing dinner. Ralph usually stored plenty of food in his own chest, so supplies weren't a problem. After dinner, Ralph sat alone in the canopy of the Willow of the Beating Man, holding the wooden chest he'd found in the living room, examining it closely. In truth, there wasn't much to examine in the chest. It was empty. But it concerned his own death, so Ralph couldn't ignore it. The good news was that the version of himself he saw in the Well of Death was older than he was now, so at least he wouldn't die today. The bad news was that even Ravenclaw couldn't escape the prophecy in the Well of Death. Ralph's death was a foregone conclusion. No, Ralph was still young, he didn't want to die like this. He had to find a way to save himself. Ralph sighed, leaned back, and closed his eyes to rest. He didn't know how much time had passed when he heard a soft rustling sound. He opened his eyes and saw Helena floating over. She was still wearing that long dress, the slit at the thigh and the deep V-neck perfectly outlining her figure. Helena sat down beside Rove, the tight deep V-neckline stretching to the sides, revealing her two large, proud breasts and the valley between them almost completely. At first glance, she was incredibly alluring. Of course, the scar on her snow-white breasts was also visible. But Helena didn't hide it. Instead, she pulled her collar down further, completely exposing her breasts and the scar to Rove's eyes. She gently stroked the wound and asked, "Is it ugly?" Ralph stared at the wound on his chest, and calmly replied, "Yes, it's ugly. A scar on the chest, how can it be pretty? But if you really can be resurrected, the wound will definitely heal, so there's no need to worry." "I'm not worried." Helena pulled her collar back, staring at the boy, and said softly, "Rolf, I've always believed you can resurrect me." Rolf's lips twitched. He really wanted to tell Helena that he was a fourth-year wizard and veterinarian. A veterinarian could kill, but couldn't resurrect. He felt a little resentful towards Cassandra for getting him into such trouble. If he ever saw her again, Rolf would definitely give her a good beating. Seeing the boy remain silent, Helena spoke up, "Rolf, Sherry is probably a descendant of Gryffindor. Actually, I should have guessed sooner. Her features are very similar to Gryffindor's." "Yes, especially her eyes and hair," Rolf remarked. "They're practically identical." "When you used the time turner to go back 1,000 years, did you also see Gryffindor?" Helena asked. "Yes," Rolf replied. That night in the Chamber of Secrets in Ravenclaw, he had told Helena that his disappearance for several months was due to using the time turner to go back 1,000 years. However, time was limited then, and Rolf said he would tell Helena the details later. Tonight was clearly a good opportunity, so Rolf quickly recounted his experiences, including the death of Ravenclaw. "I was also in the Albanian forest at the time, and then I saw an explosion." Rolf described the situation that night. "By the time I arrived at the scene, Professor Ravenclaw was already dead." Helena gripped her clothes tightly and asked, "Did you see who the killer was?" Rolf hesitated. He knew, of course, that the murderer was Slytherin, but if he told Helena rashly, she would probably impulsively go after the bloody barrow. So, Ralph decided not to tell Helena for the time being. He shook his head and said, "I didn't see the murderer. Afterwards, I took your body and your mother's body back to Hogwarts." Ralph looked at Helena and said, "You must be wondering why I didn't stop Barrow from killing you when I was right there, right?" Helena rested her chin on her knees, paused for a moment, and shook her head. "My mother also made similar time manipulation artifacts. She warned me not to change history, or I would suffer the backlash of time. If you had saved me then, I would definitely be gone now, and you wouldn't be able to come back to this world." "I understand that." Ralph looked up at the sky and said softly, "Actually, it wasn't a wasted trip. Professor Hufflepuff buried you and your mother's bodies together. A few months ago, I went to Ravenclaw's grave and checked your body. It was still perfectly preserved, exactly as it was before death, without any decay." Helena asked excitedly, "Really? After she was resurrected, she didn't see her own body? She initially thought it had been eaten by wild beasts in the Albanian forests." Rolf nodded. "Thank you, Rolf." Helena leaned down to kiss Rolf, but as a ghost, she passed right through him. Rolf quickly said, "Don't get excited. Even with your body, I don't know how to resurrect you," Helena said hopefully, "but at least there's some hope." Rolf didn't speak, only pondering, if Helena could truly be resurrected one day, could Rowena Ravenclaw, whose body was also perfectly preserved, be resurrected as well? Just as the boy was lost in thought, the black box beside him suddenly opened, and Sherry's head popped out. She exclaimed excitedly, "Rolf, come quick. The rock dragon egg you brought back is about to hatch." Hearing this, Rolf quickly got up and crawled into the box. Chapter 669 The Secret of the Golden Egg. If you were to ask Ralph about his biggest gain from the first event of the Triwizard Tournament, it would probably be the rock thief dragon egg. Because of a crack in its shell, the kind-hearted Ralph picked it up and repaired it. After several months of incubation, it was finally ready to hatch today. Ralph, Sherry, and Hermione climbed up a steep mountain path. Hermione, hands on her hips, looked up at the summit and asked breathlessly, "Didn't you say the rock thief dragon egg was about to hatch? Why are we going to Norber's lair?" "Because Norber is incubating that egg," Ralph chuckled. "The hatching of a dragon egg requires fire, and not just any fire, but a powerful magical fire, otherwise, the hatchling will be inherently weak. Dragon breath, phoenix flames, and ancient flames all fall under the category of magical fire. If these are unavailable, one can use dragon crystals to enhance the magic of the fire to hatch the egg. Of course, the best fire is dragon breath, which is equivalent to breastfeeding. In Ralph's box, there was only one dragon, Norber. Although it hadn't had any offspring yet, that didn't stop it from taking on the responsibility of incubating the eggs. Norber is a Norwegian Spinosaurus. "Would it be willing to incubate a rock slug egg?" Hermione asked doubtfully. "Normally, it wouldn't," Ralph explained. "But Norber is currently in heat, and its hormone levels are very high. Under the influence of hormones, it will actively incubate the eggs. Maternal instincts are something that all animals experience, even ferocious dragons are no exception." The three quickly reached a mountaintop and found Norber's nest. At this moment, Norber was lying in the pit, tearing at the smoking sheep carcass, its long tail constantly swishing as it ate. Various charred bones were scattered on the ground, partially melted and twisted in shape, and the air was filled with the smell of roasted meat. Norber looked up at the three, its eyes gleaming in the darkness like golden coals. It hissed a warning, and its wings crackled, flapping in the stale air, stirring up a cloud of ash. During the incubation period, the mother dragon becomes extremely irritable, attacking anything that tries to approach the eggs. However, since Ralph and Sherry raised Norber from a young age, it was practically their daughter. So, after slapping Norber, it obediently continued eating its mutton. In the center of the pit lay a dragon egg, deep black in color, its shell covered with tiny scales and dotted with bands-like spots. A continuous clicking sound came from inside the egg. When the rock thief dragon hatchlings emerge, they use their tails to break the shell. Their tail tips are already well developed at that time. The three waited patiently for a while, and finally, the shell cracked completely. A wrinkled black hatchling emerged, its body covered in smooth black scales, with a ring of tassel-like spikes on its head and bulging eyes. Ralph checked the rock thief dragon sex and found it to be male. He then examined its body and finally weighed it. Shirley stood to the side, recording all the data in a notebook. The rock slug was panting heavily, clearly starving. It crawled towards Norber, wanting to nurse. Although dragons are oviparous, female dragons can still produce milk. Rove had tasted dragon milk before in the Romanian dragon sanctuary. It tasted alright, but it could cause a fever after drinking it. But Norber was still a young woman. Where would she get milk? So, it kicked the ugly creature on the ground away with a paw. Rove smirked and quickly took out a brandy and chicken blood he had prepared beforehand. After tasting the flavors, the rock slug plunged its head into the basin, as if suckling its mother's milk, its tiny tongue licking greedily. Sherry watched for a while and laughed. "This guy is much stronger than Norbert was when he was a child." "That's right," Ralph nodded as well. "Back then, Hagrid was incubating Norbert with the flames from the fireplace. Although I later added dragon crystal and the flames of the fire serpent, it was already a bit late, so the effect was still not quite there." Ralph stopped midway through his sentence. Sherry and Hermione looked up at the boy, only to hear him repeatedly muttering, "Norbert incubated with dragon crystal, dragon crystal." Ralph's eyes widened suddenly as he looked at the two girls and said, "I think I know how to open that golden egg." Hearing the boy say this, and considering his repeated mention of dragon crystal, Sherry and Hermione exchanged a glance and immediately realized, "You mean using dragon crystal?" "That's right," Ralph nodded excitedly. "Those golden eggs are also dragon eggs. To open them, you have to follow the method for incubating dragon eggs. So putting them in ordinary flames won't work, it has to be enchanted fire. No wonder the first project required us to collect dragon crystals. The purpose was to create demonic fire to hatch the golden egg," Hermione continued. "That's right," Shirley agreed, narrowing her eyes. "I remember Ludo telling us that dragon crystals are just as important as the golden egg, related to the second project. He was definitely reminding us." After the three finished their analysis, they quickly left Norbert's lair and returned to the cabin. Ralph opened a box, took out his golden egg and dragon crystal, and went to the fireplace, placing the golden egg in the fire. Soon, the three-headed dragon carved on the golden egg let out a roar like a fire dragon. Ralph put the dragon crystal in, and as the dragon crystal began to release heat, the temperature of the flames suddenly increased, with drifting sparks rising and hot air shimmering around the dragon egg. Suddenly, the three-headed dragon carved on the golden egg changed. It opened its mouth wide, like a dragon sucking water, rapidly drawing in the surrounding flames. With a soft yet distinct click, the golden egg cracked open, like a large watermelon. It was sliced into 8 equal parts, each slice spreading out to one side and landing loudly in the fireplace. In the very center of the golden egg appeared a palm-sized statue. Its skin was iron gray, its long, unkempt dark green hair exactly like the mermaid from the Black Lake. The statue emitted a terrifying, piercing scream in the flames, much like the noise of a saw cutting wood. Ralph thought for a moment, then removed the mermaid statue from the fireplace. He waved his wand, and a large ball of water appeared in the air, which he then placed into the water sphere. In that instant, the mermaid's voice became incredibly beautiful, and it sang in the water, "Your treasure is lost, we know where it is hidden. Take that gift immediately and come before us, and we will guide you. Remember, you only have 2 hours left." Chapter 670 Slytherin with a Lion's Heart. For the remainder of the Christmas holidays, Ralph, Sherry, Hermione, and Helena spent their time at Gryffindor Castle. They thoroughly searched the entire castle. Although 1,000 years had passed and much of the stuff had decayed, many more remained intact, and all were of exceptional quality. There was a 5th century BC statue of Athena, inlaid with gold and ivory, a work by the classical sculptor Phidias. Ralph had seen a similar statue in America, half its size, which was eventually sold at auction by Gringotts for 580,000 galleons. There was also an ancient wizarding chess set, with an ivory frame and silver and gold squares, the pieces depicting Merlin, Morgan, and the Knights of the Round Table. Ralph had read about it in the History of Magic. It was King Arthur chessboard, lost after Arthur's death, and now it was in the Gryffindor house. Besides these, there were intaglio sculptures depicting hunting and warfare, a bull's head sculpted from gleaming pure silver, with golden horns and a rosette on its face. All these were Trojan gold works. Countless other items were also found, including porcelain, bronze, ivory, painted pottery, and ornately decorated swords and daggers. Of course, the most valuable item was the castle itself, a building thousands of years older than Hogwarts. However, not a single trace of Gryffindor or his descendants was found, which was the most regrettable aspect. The four stayed at the castle until the last day of their holiday before returning to Hogwarts, where they were immediately met with the attention of a group of students. Due to the ball, most students above the 4th year remained at school. The sudden, and prolonged, disappearance of Ralph, Sherry, and Hermione naturally attracted attention. However, Ralph didn't seem to care. After saying goodbye to Sherry and Hermione, he headed straight for the headmaster's office. Dumbledore should have returned from Nurmengard by now, right? In the headmaster's office, Dumbledore sat behind his desk, his fingertips touching, listening quietly to Snape's report. Karkaroff's mark has turned black too. He's very nervous, worried about the Dark Lord's return and punishment. You know, after the Dark Lord's downfall, he gave the Ministry of Magic a lot of help. Snape glanced at Dumbledore's long, curved nose, paused, and said, "Karkaroff plans to run away immediately if the mark becomes painful. He even asked me to run with him. I've always believed that danger is the best way to test humanity," Dumbledore said calmly. "When a person is safe and sound, always showing the world their best side. However, when truly facing danger, when forced to make a choice, things aren't necessarily so beautiful. Sometimes, they can even erase all good emotions. So," Dumbledore looked at Snape and asked, "And you, Severus?" "Me." Snape looked at the old man in confusion, seemingly not understanding what he was asking. "Yes, Voldemort's power is recovering, and he could be resurrected at any moment," Dumbledore said in a deep voice. "Faced with this outcome, Karkaroff has made his choice, to escape. If you want to leave Hogwarts like him," Dumbledore's deep blue eyes gazed at Snape. "I will agree. I will even provide you with a safe house abroad to ensure your safety and keep you away from Voldemort's threat. But if you choose to stay, I will send you back to Voldemort's side. At that time, your situation will be more dangerous than anyone else's. You could die at any moment." At this moment, most of the portraits of the headmasters on the wall opened their eyes and looked down at Snape. He could feel the weight of each pair of tiny eyes resting on him. "Severus, I will not ask you to stay or leave," Dumbledore said calmly. "But you must make this choice yourself." "A choice?" Snape suddenly stood up from his chair, his voice suddenly hoarse with a sudden surge of emotion. 13 years ago, on the night Lily died, I made my choice. Snape's voice was shrill and hoarse, filled with a chilling rage. His dark eyes stared at Dumbledore. Run? I will never run, Dumbledore. I'm not that kind of coward. Of course you're not a coward. Dumbledore looked at the middle-aged man before him and sighed. Severus, you are much braver than most people. You know, sometimes I think our sorting was too hasty, especially with you. Snape fell silent for a moment. If he had been sorted into Gryffindor back then, perhaps everything would be different today. No, Dumbledore, Phineas Black's portrait on the wall retorted indignantly. Snape is of course a Slytherin. The sorting hat didn't put him in the wrong house. You can't assume that all excellent students have to be Gryffindors, but you can't deny one fact, Phineas, Dumbledore said seriously. Snape has the heart of a lion, a Slytherin with the heart of a lion. Headmaster Depp clicked his tongue. That sounds really strange. Just then, there was a loud knock at the door. Snape walked towards the door, his expression sorrowful, but when he opened it, his deadpan expression returned. Ralph stood in the doorway and greeted Snape. Good evening, Professor Snape. Snape merely glanced at the boy, said nothing, and walked straight towards the spiral staircase. How rude, Ralph muttered, entering the headmaster's office and sitting down in the chair Snape had just been sitting in. Good evening, Ralph, Dumbledore smiled. Would you like something to drink? A latte, heated and with less sugar, please. Dumbledore took out his wand and gently fiddled with it. Instantly, a spinning saucer appeared in the air and landed on the table. Ralph picked up his teacup, took a small sip, and said, Professor, I heard from Aberforth that you went to Normangar during your holidays. Yes, I went to see Gellert and asked him some questions. Dumbledore rested his hands on the armrests of his chair and said softly, I also went to Berlin and met Grigorovich. Grigorovich, Ralph paused, surprised. Why did you go to see him? Dumbledore picked up his wand and gently fiddled with it. I went to see Grigorovich and Gellert to ask about the same thing, the Elder Wand, and its master. Chapter 671 The Identity of the Locked Room Attacker. Hearing Dumbledore's words, Ralph was stunned, glancing instinctively at the Elder Wand the headmaster was playing with. The Elder Wand was clearly in Dumbledore's hands. Why was he going to Grindelwald and Grigorovich to ask about its owner? Surely not to show off his spoils, right? Gellert, look at this. It's your thick, hard Elder Wand, which I play with every day now. Hell, the image was too surreal. Just thinking about it made Ralph shudder. While the boy was lost in thought, Dumbledore narrowed his sharp eyes. He was always keen-eyed, and few things escaped his notice. Ralph's instinctive glance at his own wand when he mentioned the Elder Wand had naturally been caught by Dumbledore. The old man thought for a moment, then asked, Ralph, you seem to know that the wand I hold is the Elder Wand. Ralph didn't know how Dumbledore had seen through him, but since he had, he honestly admitted, yes. How did you know? Dumbledore's question at least indicated that he hadn't used legilimency. Ralph's mind worked quickly. Of course, he wouldn't say it was from his past life's memories, so after a moment's thought, he immediately found the most plausible explanation. During the summer holidays, I stayed at Grigorovich's house for a while with his granddaughter, Karin. When I talked to Grigorovich about the Saints, he told me he had found the Elder Wand through the Saints organization. Ralph explained slowly. Mr. Grigorovich said that one day a blond boy broke into his workshop and stole the Elder Wand. Grigorovich even showed me what the boy looked like. Ralph paused, then continued, during the Christmas holidays, I went to Godric's Hollow and visited Mrs. Bathilda Bagshot. In her cupboard, I saw a photograph of that blond boy. Mrs. Bagshot told me it was her grandnephew, Grindelwald. Ralph looked at the wand in Dumbledore's hand and said softly, since it was Grindelwald who stole the Elder Wand, and he lost to you in 1945, the Elder Wand must be in your possession. It's not hard to guess. Dumbledore smiled, his surprise and admiration written all over his face, and exclaimed, a brilliant deduction. This wand is indeed the legendary Deathly Hallows, the Elder Wand. Now that the Elder Wand is in your possession, Ralph said curiously, why are you searching for Grindelwald and Grigorovich? Remember a few months ago, when a mysterious wizard tried to force his way into Hufflepuff's chamber? Dumbledore asked. Ralph nodded. On the day the first event of the Triwizard Tournament ended, Ralph took Sherry, Hermione, and Fleur to the kitchen for dinner. Then, the portrait of a Hufflepuff house elf suddenly appeared, informing them that someone had attempted to break into Hufflepuff's chamber. That mysterious wizard used a spell called Blood Shadow, which allows him to separate his shadow from his body, creating an avatar that moves outside, Dumbledore said, leaning back in his chair. This magic comes from the Elder Wand, and only its original owner could use it, so I'm investigating its former owner. That person wasn't Gellert, and I went to look for Grigorovich, but it wasn't him either. Ralph narrowed his eyes, surprised. It couldn't be Akis, Grigorovich's previous owner of the Elder Wand, could it? Dumbledore didn't speak. He stood up, walked around the table, and bent down in front of a cabinet by the door. When the headmaster straightened up, he was holding a shallow stone basin with a circle of symbols engraved around its rim. He placed the pensieve on the table and asked, "Ralph, would you like to walk with me along Grigorovich's memory path?" "With pleasure," Ralph said. Dumbledore took a crystal bottle from his pocket, containing a swirling, floating silvery white substance. He poured the silvery substance from the bottle into the pensieve, where it slowly swirled, emitting a faint glow. Dumbledore entered the pensieve, and Ralph followed closely behind, leaning forward and plunging into the silvery memories. Ralph's feet left the office floor, plunging through the swirling darkness, falling, until suddenly, the intense sunlight forced him to close his eyes. When Ralph's eyes adjusted, he opened them to find himself standing on a country road, with Dumbledore beside him. 3 meters ahead of them stood a man of about 30. He was short and stout, with a very broad chest and shoulders, his robe stretched taut by his round belly, and his eyes small, reduced to 2 dots, like a mole's. It was young Grigorovich. Grigorovich held a hand-drawn map, studied the terrain for a moment, and then walked briskly along the path. Dumbledore and Ralph followed. After walking for a while, Grigorovich entered a dense forest, then turned left, revealing a building. It was a massive, carved tomb, hidden among tall grasses and waist-high brown grass. The tomb was a 6-tiered, flat-topped, 4-sided pyramid, resembling a step pyramid. Before it stood a tombstone, carved with symbols of the Deathly Hallows, and below it, in English, "Here lies Octavian Akis. May the life of the departed never cease." The tomb looked new, as if Akis had been buried there recently. Grigorovich waved his wand, and the tomb split in two, revealing a huge coffin. He opened the coffin, and inside lay an old man, his hands clasped to his chest, a wand in his hand. The old man was not dead, but he was very old, almost dead, about to die completely as the owner of the old wand. But that was no longer possible. Upon seeing the Elder Wand, Grigorovich's eyes lit up with covetousness. He raised the wand and cried out, "Expelliarmus!" The Elder Wand fell into Grigorovich's hands, and without a second thought, he ran towards the grave. The old man sat up shakily, watching in despair as Grigorovich snatched the Elder Wand away. Ralph narrowed his eyes, staring intently at Akis in the coffin. His face was covered in wrinkles, his hair was white, and he had a white beard. His left eye was tightly closed, as if he were blind. "Do you recognize him?" Dumbledore asked. Ralph remained silent for a long time, then said incredulously, "He's the one who succeeded Barty Crouches, the Director of International Cooperation at the Ministry of Magic." Chapter 672 The Prisoners of Azkaban. After leaving the pensieve, Ralph and Dumbledore returned to their office, but for a moment no one spoke, not even the portraits of the headmaster. After a long while, Ralph asked in a very soft voice, with a hint of doubt, "Was that really the Director of International Cooperation, Atoyi Akis? He looked so old, almost dead, and that was a memory from over 100 years ago. The Director of International Cooperation is so young now." Of course, he wasn't young. The Director of International Cooperation also had a face full of wrinkles, but compared to him, his beard and hair were completely black, and he seemed much more energetic. And the old man lying in the coffin in the pensieve, seemingly about to die. Could they be the same person? But if they weren't, they looked almost identical. They couldn't be twins, could they? Dumbledore seemed to know what Ralph was thinking. He said softly, "I checked the Hogwarts admission records. Akis doesn't have a brother, so he can't be a twin. As for why he didn't die, after Grigorovich got the Elder Wand, he fled the graveyard. He didn't actually confirm whether Akis was dead or not. Dumbledore guessed, after the Elder Wand was taken from Akis, he might have used some kind of magic to extend his lifespan, and then lived until now." Ralph pondered. So, as the former owner of the Elder Wand, what was he doing at Hogwarts after infiltrating the Ministry of Magic and becoming its director? Was it just for Hufflepuff's Chamber of Secrets? Ralph thought for a moment, then lowered his voice and asked, "Should we capture him? Whatever Akis's purpose, capture him first, Then use Veritaserum, we even know the color of his underwear. Not for now, Dumbledore said. That encounter proved that Acus is very powerful. He's also extremely cautious, only appearing at Hogwarts during the Triwizard Tournament. He won't be easy to catch. Ralph understood Dumbledore's meaning. Facing such a powerful wizard could easily affect the Hogwarts students. He thought for a moment, still puzzled, and asked, how did Acus know the location of the Chamber of Secrets? I suspect he discovered it when he was repairing the Hogwarts sewer system, Dumbledore said softly. He and Corvinus Gaunt were classmates, they were both Slytherin students. Later, when Corvinus Gaunt repaired the Hogwarts sewer system, Acus was his assistant. Ralph was stunned. If that was the case, then it wasn't surprising. But was Gaunt also involved? Ralph stared at the pensieve, seemingly lost in thought. Dumbledore picked up his teacup, took a sip, and continued, by the way, I received a letter from Arthur. He told me about what happened in Godric's Hollow. Those wizards said they were hired by a woman named Minette Perrault. Ralph asked, what do you think? Could Minette Perrault be Voldemort's new servant? This matter is definitely related to Tom, Dumbledore said slowly. But knowing him as I do, if Lily's remains were the key to his resurrection, he would definitely go to the graveyard himself, not hire dark wizards to steal them. I think so too. I always felt that Lily Potter's body might not be the key to Voldemort's resurrection, Ralph said. Dumbledore touched the tips of his two long, slender fingers together, resting his chin on them, and murmured, the Dark Lord is destined to rise again, with the help of 3 women, one born, one died, one loved. If Professor Trelawney's prophecy of one dying doesn't refer to Harry's mother, Lily, then who is it? Dumbledore stared at the ceiling through his half-moon spectacles, while Ralph, sitting opposite him, was also lost in thought. Azkaban, a group of tall Dementors slid across the floor, followed by several criminals, and then 2 Aurors escorting them. Passing through a long corridor, they arrived at a cell. The Aurors opened the cell door, then pushed it open forcefully, shoving the criminal inside, before locking the door. They turned to leave, but as they passed a cell, a figure suddenly approached and called out to an Auror, Harbour, Harbour. Harbour stopped, frowning as he scrutinized the prisoner. The man was almost skin and bones, a tangled mass of dirty hair hanging down to his elbows, waxy skin clinging to his facial bones. Harbour stared for a long time but couldn't make out who it was. It's me, I'm Barty Crouch, the man said, lifting his hair. Mr. Crouch, Harbour exclaimed in surprise. What happened to you? Well, that was a pointless question. Which wizard who had been imprisoned in Azkaban for half a year didn't look like that? What do you need? Harbour asked after a moment's thought. I need to see Dumbledore. I have something to tell him. I must see Dumbledore, and tell him in person, Crouch stammered. Harbour hesitated, but the Auror Cole beside him chuckled. Mr. Crouch, Minister Fudge has ordered that you are in prison for life and cannot see anyone. If you have anything to say, you can speak to Minister Fudge, and I will relay it for you. Crouch's emotions became unstable. He roared, no. I will only speak to Dumbledore, or I'll speak to Rolf Scamander who has captured me. You can inform them, then there's nothing I can do, Cole said grimly. Let's go, Harper, let's go back to the Ministry of Magic. Harper hesitated for a moment, then followed Clay away. Harper used to work under Crouch, considered his subordinate, but because he couldn't stand Crouch's harshness, he was transferred to the Auror's office. As for whether to relay the message to Dumbledore, Crouch was Minister Fudge's political enemy, and imprisoned in Azkaban, with no hope of a comeback. Harper certainly wouldn't invite trouble. After the Aurors left, Crouch slumped to the floor, staring blankly at the dark ceiling. He had to escape, and bring the earth-shattering secret he'd discovered to Dumbledore. He had to break out of Azkaban. In the dead of night, the Dementors opened the cell doors one by one and swam inside. It was dinner time for both the prisoners and the Dementors. As official civil servants, guarding prisoners for the Ministry of Magic was their duty. But the corresponding reward, the Ministry tacitly approved of them obtaining rations from the prisoners. Soon, heart-wrenching screams echoed from the cells. A Dementor slid into Crouch's cell, tossed moldy food on the floor, and was about to absorb Crouch's happy memories when it suddenly stopped. Because the happy emotions had vanished. Dementors have no eyes, they can only judge a person's life or death by sensing their emotions. The disappearance of emotions, naturally meant death. The Dementor extended a faintly glowing, gray, thin, and scabbed hand from its cloak. It groped for a moment, found Crouch's body, and dragged it out. The Dementors quickly dragged the corpse to the Azkaban cemetery, where all the dead prisoners were thrown. The Dementors tossed Crouch into a pile of bones and turned to leave. After an unknown amount of time, Crouch's corpse suddenly opened its eyes, gasping for breath. This was a dark magic he had learned from a spellbook, capable of putting a wizard into a state of suspended animation. Because it required the occlumency spell, it was very difficult to use. Crouch never imagined he would actually need it, let alone use it in Azkaban. He shakily stood up, cautiously ran to the shore, observed for a while, successfully found his bearings, and then plunged into the vast sea. Crouch was going to swim from Azkaban back to England. Chapter 673 Weasley's Affair. Ralph and Dumbledore talked until late into the night. However, their discussion of the prophecy didn't last long. They mostly talked about Gryffindor Castle and Sherry. The portraits of the headmasters whispered amongst themselves, surprised that Gryffindor had descendants. But there was no need to worry about them revealing what they overheard. The headmaster's office was protected by magic that would restrain these portraits. Before leaving, Dumbledore gave Ralph a meaningful reminder to take good care of Sherry and not to lay a hand on her or bully the young girl. He warned that if her father came knocking one day, he'd be in big trouble. Ralph didn't take Dumbledore's warning too seriously. A father who abandoned his daughter at the convent, who cared who he was? If he actually appeared in front of Ralph, who knew who would beat whom? That's how tough he was. Ralph and Dumbledore talked until late the next day, and as usual, he got up early, went to the Great Hall, and sat down at the Hufflepuff table for breakfast. Gabrielle arrived early but ignored Ralph, looking as if she wanted to break off their friendship. Ralph smiled and asked, "Fleur, have you cracked the secret of the golden egg?" "Not yet." Fleur shook her head, looking distressed. "I've tried everything, but I just can't open the golden egg." "Have you cracked it?" Ralph hummed in agreement and whispered in Fleur's ear. Gabrielle, incredibly curious, quickly leaned closer, wanting to hear what was going on. Seeing this, Ralph immediately fell silent, looking enigmatic. After Gabrielle sat back down, he leaned back and continued speaking in Fleur's ear. The little girl was so angry she wanted to bite her way. She crossed her arms and complained, "Sister, look at Ralph, he bullied me." Fleur patted Gabrielle's head and laughed. "Wasn't it you who ignored Ralph first? Wasn't it because he disappeared during the Christmas holidays?" Gabrielle glared at Ralph, looking aggrieved. "You left school without saying goodbye, and you were gone for the whole holiday, taking Sherry and Hermione with you, but not me and my sister. Didn't I write you a letter explaining?" Ralph spread his hands helplessly. "We went to assist the Aurors in investigating a tomb raiding case, so we couldn't take you with us. As for why I didn't tell you, I thought we'd be back by noon, but we ended up staying for the whole holiday." Ralph patted Gabrielle's head and said, "Next time something like this happens, even if the Aurors stop me, I'll definitely take you." Gabrielle tilted her head and asked, "Really?" Ralph said sincerely, "Really, I never lie." Gabrielle huffed. "Okay, then I'll reluctantly forgive you for leaving without saying goodbye this time." Ralph chuckled. These days, little girls are still the easiest to fool. Grave robbery. Hannah, standing nearby, was taken aback by Ralph's words. "Are there many grave robbers like this lately?" Ralph glanced at Hannah and asked tentatively, "What, did your family encounter one too?" "Yes," Hannah nodded. "My mother wrote to me saying that my grandfather's grave had been vandalized." Ralph was secretly alarmed. Had his act of blowing up Hannah's grandfather's grave been exposed? But he clearly repaired it. Ralph scratched his head and asked cautiously, "Was the damage very serious?" "Not really." Hannah shook her head. "My father went to check, and the grave has been repaired by grave robbers." "Repaired? How do you know the grave was vandalized?" Gabrielle asked suspiciously. "There's magic on the coffin," Hannah explained. "If someone vandalizes, the bells in our house will ring. That wretched grave robber, he'll be caught sooner or later." Ralph smirked. Luckily, he'd left quickly that day, otherwise, if Hannah knew it was him, that would be too embarrassing. After breakfast, Ralph and Neville found Sherry and left the Great Hall with her, the three heading towards Hagrid's cabin. Their first lesson was about protecting magical creatures, but no one wanted to have class in this cold weather, let alone deal with the Blastale. Heaven knows what kind of monsters those damned creatures had grown into after a winter of fattening. Walking on the thick snow, Neville asked, "Ralph, Sherry, have you two read last week's newspaper?" "No." Ralph shook his head. They'd been staying in Gryffindor Castle the whole time, hardly ever going down the mountain. so naturally they hadn't seen the recent newspapers. Any special news? There were a few articles about Rita Skeeter. Neville took a copy of the Daily Prophet from his pocket and handed it to Ralph. Ralph glanced at Neville's face, his heart sinking. Had that damned Rita written something about him? No. Margaret went to see Rita, didn't she? With her there couldn't be any news about him, right? Ralph quickly opened the newspaper, and the girl with the ponytail leaned over to look at it together. There was a shocking headline: Harry Potter's first love cheats on potions professor, the secret heartbreak of the miraculous boy. After losing his parents, 14-year-old Harry Potter thought he had finally found solace at Hogwarts with his inseparable girlfriend, Ron Weasley. But little did he know that in his already painful life, he would soon suffer another emotional trauma. Ron Weasley was an ordinary-looking but ambitious wizard who seemed to have a particular fondness for famous wizards. Harry alone wasn't enough to satisfy her appetite. The renowned potions master, Severus Snape, was also on her hunting list. At the Triwizard Tournament's Christmas ball, Weasley secretly invited Professor Snape to the ball, telling him, "I've never felt this way about any other man." Then, Snape and Weasley went to the potions office for a private ball, spending the entire night there, and didn't emerge. Poor Harry Potter. However, the real reason Harry and Snape were so infatuated was probably not Weasley's natural beauty. "Ron Weasley is really ugly and stupid," said Draco Malfoy. Malfoy, a pretty, lively fourth-year girl and a Potter admirer, said, "Weasley probably made a love potion to seduce Harry Potter." Yes, I think she did. At Hogwarts, love potions are naturally forbidden, and Snape's relationship with the students undoubtedly requires Professor Dumbledore's serious investigation. Special Correspondent Rita Skeeter reports. Ralph and Sherry exchanged a glance, both instantly dumbfounded. Chapter 674 The New Professor of Protecting Magical Creatures. Reading Rita's article fabricating a love triangle between Harry, Ron, and Snape, Ralph couldn't help but gasp. He wouldn't dare openly criticize Professor Snape, yet Rita was so audacious. Wasn't she afraid of being poisoned when she returned to Hogwarts? Rita truly deserved her title as the most outspoken journalist of the new awards. However, to be fair, although the content was somewhat fabricated, the inclusion of celebrities, infidelity, and teacher-student relationships made it quite entertaining, leaving readers wanting more. This was Rita's brilliance. She understood a reader's deepest desires. In contrast, another of her reports during the Christmas holidays seemed rather unremarkable. Dumbledore's major mistake. Special Correspondent Rita Skeeter reports that the eccentric headmaster of Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry, Abbot Dumbledore, has always been known for hiring controversial teachers. This September, he hired Mad-Eye Moody, a man with violent tendencies, as the defense against the dark arts teacher. This decision greatly surprised many in the Ministry of Magic. However, compared to Hagrid, the Professor Dumbledore hired to protect the magical creatures teacher, Mad-Eye was relatively responsible and kind. In this article, Rita meticulously listed all the defense against the dark arts professors Dumbledore had hired over the past few decades: dark wizards, con artists, smugglers, vampires, squibs pretending to have magic. Basically, none of them were good people. Finally, she revealed Hagrid's half-giant identity in the article, implying that he might be Dumbledore's illegitimate son, which explained his decades-long favor with the headmaster. To be honest, aside from the illegitimate son aspect, the other details were quite objective. For example, Hagrid illegally crossbred a sphinx and a fire crab to create the dangerous Blastale, and forced students to care for it. Ralph sighed slightly. He had repeatedly asked Hagrid to hand over the Blastale and warned him not to tell anyone. Well, now look what happened. How is Hagrid now? Ralph asked. I don't know, Neville shook his head. Hagrid hasn't eaten in the Great Hall since that report came out. Nobody knows where he's gone. I wonder if he won't come to class later. Probably not, Ralph said. Hagrid will probably hide for a while. Ralph was right. When they arrived at the cabin, they didn't see Hagrid. Instead, they saw an elderly witch. She was about 60 years old, thin and stern. She had a long face, a pointed chin, and small ears. Her black hair was turning gray, but her eyes were bright and piercing like agate. The witch saw Ralph and walked towards him, asking, "Child, do you remember me?" The Hufflepuff and Ravenclaw students all turned to look at Ralph. Everyone seemed familiar to him. Ralph stared at the witch, searching his memory for a moment, then remembered and said, "Oh, you are, Mrs. Wilmina Glapland." A rare smile bloomed on Wilmina Glapland's lips. It's me, child. I was so afraid you wouldn't remember me. The last time we met, you were only 9, a tiny little thing, not much older than an elf. Now you're much taller than me. If I hadn't seen your picture in the newspaper every day, I wouldn't have recognized you. Ralph remembered perfectly. When he was 9, he and Newt visited the Hebrides and stayed with the McFasty family for over half a year. The McFasty family was an ancient, pure-blooded family, capable of communicating with and taming dragons. Legend had it that their family possessed a magical horn that could forcibly control dragons. Therefore, the McFasties were also known as the Dragon Kings. This title wasn't an exaggeration. They had lived in the Hebrides of Scotland for generations, caring for the black dragons on the islands. Even each child in the McFasty family would choose a newly hatched black dragon as a companion in their youth and raise it themselves. The Scamander children, at the age of 10, could only choose one of the 3 starter magical creatures, a niffler, a salamander, or a botricle, as their companion. Compared to that, their privileges were indeed quite meager. The witch before him, Wilmina Grapland, was also a wizard of the McFasty family, but she later married Grapland and took his surname. She was also a dragon expert and magizoologist, practically Newt's student. By the way, when I came to Hogwarts, Arlene asked me to say hello to you, Grapland said. She said she really wanted to meet you. We had a bet back then. Hearing Arlene's name, Ralph smirked. Arlene McFasty was Grapland's grandniece, the same age as Ralph. The year she chose her black dragon, Ralph was there too, and he almost kidnapped the black dragon cub she chose. They even fought over it. Arlene, taking advantage of her early development and being a head taller than Ralph, proposed a father-daughter match. Whoever lost had to call the other dad. Ralph, who already knew magic, easily defeated Arlene, making her call him dad for 2 months, when no one else was around. Unexpectedly, Arlene remembered this and brought it up herself. Was she trying to get revenge? Speaking of which, Ralph was quite curious when he first enrolled at Hogwarts, wondering why he hadn't seen Arlene. Later, he learned that the McFasty family maintained a tradition of having magical education at home. Ralph exchanged pleasantries with Professor Glapland for a while, and as class time approached, Glapland said, "I am Professor Glapland, the temporary substitute teacher for your Conservation of Magical Creatures class. I will be teaching the class for the next period." "Where's Hagrid?" Justin asked, raising his hand. "Hagrid is sick," Glapland said. "He needs to rest for a while." Everyone looked at each other at first, then quickly cheered. After all, a new teacher meant they wouldn't have to deal with the Blastale anymore. As expected, Professor Glapland didn't lead the students to the pumpkin patch. Instead, he bypassed the stables and headed towards Black Lake. They trudged through the snow, soon reaching the lake's shore. Most of Black Lake was frozen over, and Durmstrang's large ship lay moored in the water, looking strangely like a ghost ship recently salvaged. Professor Glapland stood on the shore and announced loudly, "Today I will teach you about mermaids." Chapter 675 Mermaid. Hearing Professor Glapland mention mermaids, many students became excited. Whether wizards or from Muggle families, they had all heard stories of mermaids in their childhood. In their minds, mermaids were synonymous with beauty. But as Professor Glapland whistled and 3 mermaids surfaced, the young wizards were dumbfounded. The mermaids they imagined were blonde, blue-eyed, handsome, with their upper bodies and long, graceful tails. But these mermaids before them had iron-gray skin, long, messy, dark green hair, yellow, broken teeth, and slippery, deathly white tails. They looked like corpses. Forget beauty, they were anything but ordinary. They were clearly a group of grotesque monsters. No, these definitely weren't mermaids, but deformed monsters that had drunk Muggle nuclear wastewater. Ralph muttered to himself, "The Little Mermaid," starring Halle Bailey decades later, seemed to be a realistic film. After a long silence, Justin raised his hand and said, "Professor Glapland, we want to see real mermaids, not these ugly monsters." "They are real mermaids, and they were not ugly at all," Glapland corrected. "I specifically sought out Mercus, the mermaid leader of Black Lake, and asked her to provide me with several of her tribe's people as teaching models. These mermaids are truly stunning beauties in their tribe, and are very popular with the male mermaids." Everyone was speechless. They never dreamed that the word stunning beauty could be used like this. "But Professor, I heard my grandmother tell the story of the witch Mirabella Plunkett," Susan questioned. "If all the stunning beauties among mermaids look like this, how could she have eloped with a mermaid?" Mirabella Plunkett was a 19th-century witch who fell in love with a mermaid living in Lomond Lake. After her family rejected the marriage, she transformed herself into haddock and eloped with a mermaid. This story was practically a household name in wizarding families, which was why they believed mermaids were handsome or beautiful. A very good question. Does anyone know why? Glapland asked. She looked around, and seeing no one raise their hand, called on someone. Rolf, Scamander. Different subspecies of mermaids look very different, Rolf explained. Mirabella Plunkett was obsessed with the sirens, which are beautiful. The mermaids in the Black Lake are the Selkire subspecies, and from a human aesthetic perspective, they are generally ugly. That's right, 5 points for Hufflepuff, Professor Glapland said with satisfaction. So, are the sirens the most beautiful mermaids, Professor? Michael Corner of Ravenclaw asked. No, Professor Glapland shook her head. The golden double-tailed mermaids living in the Aegean Sea are the most beautiful mermaids, even comparable to Velas. Hearing the words golden double-tailed mermaids, Rolf narrowed his eyes, suddenly thinking of Mircella. He wondered how she was doing, whether she had found Avalon. Macmillan eagerly said, then why don't we raise some golden double-tailed mermaids in the Black Lake? This suggestion was agreed upon by most of the students. The Delacour sisters of Boxburtons were half Velas, and Velas had even appeared in the Quidditch World Cup. They all knew how beautiful Velas were. And since the golden double-tailed mermaids could rival Velas, it would be a shame not to raise them in the Black Lake. First, different subspecies of mermaids live in different environments. Professor Glapland patiently explained. The golden double-tailed mermaid thrives in a Mediterranean climate. If they live in the Black Lake for an extended period, they are prone to developing dropsy. Second, mermaids are a highly intelligent species. They are qualified to be human, but they have actively rejected this classification. However, this does not mean that mermaids are servants or pets of wizards, nor is it something to be kept as pets. They are an independent race, just like us, centaurs, giants, and goblins. Professor Glapland looked at the young wizards' innocent faces and said seriously, children, this is the first piece of knowledge I will teach you, and it is also the most important knowledge in the course of protecting magical creatures. Respect other species. Ignorance and stupidity are not the greatest obstacles to survival. Arrogance is. You must remember this well, otherwise, one day you will inevitably pay a heavy price for it. Professor Glapland was not tall, and his tone was not particularly serious, but he possessed an intimidating aura. The students quieted down and began taking notes rapidly. We must respect a merfolk as a race, but when conflicts arise with them, we must also know how to deal with them. This is what I will teach you in this lesson. Professor Glapland gave Rolf and Sherry a meaningful look. The two exchanged a glance, immediately understanding the implication in Glapland's words. This was clearly Dumbledore's instruction to have Glapland give the Hogwarts champions special training, since their second project would involve dealing with merfolk. So, can anyone tell me what special abilities merfolk possess? Miss Swinton, mermaid songs have magic, capable of bewitching wizards, Sherry replied. That's right, Ravenclaw, 2 points, Professor Glapland said. The first element in fighting mermaids is to use magic to block out sound, but that alone isn't enough to defeat them. You also need to find their weaknesses. Mermaids don't have legs, they move through the water by wagging their tails. Their tails are their weak points, Glapland said slowly. Leg-locking spells are ineffective against them, but leg-softening spells are very useful. Besides that, mermaids also keep creatures like Grindylows as pets. Hannah raised her hand and said, Professor Black taught us how to deal with the Grindylows in last year's defense against the dark arts class. Very good, Glapland nodded in satisfaction. Besides Grindylows, there's something else you should be careful of, loba worms. These are very powerful aquatic creatures, about 10 inches long, consisting of a flexible nozzle and a venom sac. When threatened, they contract their venom sac and spray venom to drive away attackers. Mermaids use loba worms as water guns, capable of shooting a long distance through the water. Even if they miss their target, they can pollute an area of water, poisoning their enemies. Glapland reminded him, when facing the mermaids, you must take the antidote for the loba worm. Ralph realized he had indeed overlooked this, and quickly jotted it down in his notebook, preparing to go back and brew the antidote. Glapland waved his hand, saying, all right, now you'll have your hands-on practice with these mermaids. As soon as Glapland finished speaking, the 3 ugly female mermaids jumped ashore and rushed towards Ralph. They had observed him in the water for a long time, already eyeing the handsome Ralph, and were eager to have their mermaid practice with him. End of this chapter. Thank you so much for reading until the end. Don't forget to give it a like. Looking for more exclusive content and immediate access? Subscribe to our Patreon. Remember, every like, subscription or donation encourages us to continue. Thank you all. See you in the next video.